Good morning and welcome to the ABC's coverage of the 2025 Anzac Day March from the Shrine of Remembrance here in Melbourne. Well, we're live on an incredibly important day. It's my incredible pleasure to be joining you once again. We're expecting to see thousands of people, a huge crowd gathering through this morning to mark our diggers past and present, their contribution to Australia. This is, of course, a very important day for me personally. I served in the Navy for 12 years before coming to the ABC, and it was my honour to serve overseas on deployment and to do a lot of community aid work for our neighbours in the region. I have lost some friends since my service, and it's days like today that give me the opportunity to reconnect with my old defence mates and remember those we've lost, and also to thank our ongoing service people for the contributions that they are continuing to make to our great country. Well, this morning started, as it always does, with thousands of people, a huge crowd here, waking up early, gathering in the pre-dawn light to, well, hear the last post play at the traditional dawn service.
2025 marks 80 years since the end of World War II. And most of us only have our imaginations to know what it must have been like to be there at the end of a long war. To say goodbye to the threat, goodbye to the fear, goodbye to the killing, and goodbye to the goodbyes. But the people cheering in the streets must have wondered, as the parties died down and life began again, if anyone would remember them 80 years later. Would their sacrifices be recognised, their names recalled? And if they were still alive, would anyone even care? It's almost dawn. There's no other morning like this, and there's no other gathering like this. In these quiet moments before the sun comes, feeling pride and grief, gratitude and sadness, for the stories we know, for the stories still to be told, and for the people who risked their lives to tell them. For the fighters and the peacemakers, for the ones who can still hear our thanks, and for the ones long gone. The ones who never got a chance to live a full life and would never know that there'd be mornings like this, and that it was because of them.
Stand to!
They went with songs to the battle. They were young, straight of limb, true of eye, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end against odds uncounted. They fell with their faces to the foe. They shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. lest we forget. Stand down.
I thank those who have made sacrifices and given service. They have helped shape our nation, and we must in kind honour their duty and their courage by cultivating a nation of security and peace, lest we forget.
Flanders fields, the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row, the mark our place, and in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, lie scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields.
The official party will now move to the sanctuary of the Shrine of Remembrance, where the Governor will lay a wreath. Shrine Guard, dismount. That concludes the Anzac Day dawn service. On behalf of RSL Victoria, thank you for joining us in this reflection of dawn, as we make our silent promises to always remember those who served, and those who loved them, and those who missed them. Good morning, unless we forget.
Such beautiful pictures, and what a fitting start to the morning. Well, the march is about to commence, but before it does, here's Leanne Wong, who's going to be out and about on the streets speaking with families, diggers and dignitaries right throughout the morning.
Thanks, Nate. It's an honour to be here today at the Shrine of Remembrance, where soon thousands will be gathering and taking part in this year's Anzac Day March. They'll be lining St Kilda Road, starting at the Princess Bridge, all the way down here to the Shrine to honour the service and sacrifice of our veterans, as well as providing support to our current serving members of the forces. I'm really looking forward to chatting to our diggers, family and friends today, and of course bringing you all the memories and emotions from such an important day. Now, in typical Melbourne fashion, the skies are looking a little bit grey today, but for a more in-depth weather update, I'm going to hand it back to the expert. Back to you, Nate.
Thanks, Leanne. Oh, wow, what a beautiful picture over the city of Melbourne this morning. blue skies with some cloud around. I have been saying all week, if you've been watching me in the mornings, telling you the weather, to pack an umbrella. Well, right now we are getting away with it. I did say I'd try to sort the weather for us this morning. There are showers all around Melbourne, but none for the city itself right now. But we are expecting to see some rain developing. I reckon we might just get away with it for the march and see that wet weather really picking up through this afternoon. Well, we look forward to crossing you back to you, Leanne, right through the morning. Well, as you can see, the shrine is just absolutely stunning in the morning light. We're expecting to see people just starting to step off from the starting position at Flinders Street Station. We'll see the participants then making their way down along St Kilda Road and to Anzac Avenue in front of the shrine. Finally, through to the forecourt, you can see people already starting to gather here at the Shrine of Remembrance. Well, you don't just have me to help guide you through the morning. In fact, I am joined by some very expert commentators back after a few years' break. Brigadier Michelle Campbell. We've also got a familiar voice from last year, Lieutenant Colonel James Ealing, and a new voice for 2025, Dr. Adrian Threlfall. A very good morning to the three of you.
Good morning, Nate. Great to be back after a couple of years. So, yeah, here we are in the booth and a great, stunning day for Melbourne.
Yeah, we've done all right, haven't we? James, you're back this year again. I didn't scare you off last year.
No, I've come back. Very excited to be here on what so far is a glorious Melbourne day.
And Adrian, a very warm welcome to you, sir. Are you looking forward to the day ahead?
I am, most definitely. Thank you for having me.
Now, I just want to let our viewers know, since they can't see us here in the commentary box, Adrian, you have some history in the military.
If you mean family history, most definitely, but I was an army reservist for a couple of years, but of far more lowly rank than the two I'm sitting beside. I was just a private.
Right. So we've got a private. Michelle, Brigadier, which service is that from again?
What do you mean?
Which service is a brigadier part of?
Oh, I've been an Army Reservist for 36 years, and when you get to the rank of Colonel, you become a senior officer, so you lose your corps affiliations. We don't lose them, you just, you're part of a senior officer corps.
Yeah, and James, your service is?
Army.
Right, so I'm joined by three Army people. I'm the sole person holding up the Navy end. Hopefully our viewers will keep that in mind as I stumble through all of your Army expertise, coming from a bit of a wetter background. Right, so we can see the march here now, stepping off, Victoria Police, the Mounted Division leading off.
Yes, the Victoria Police contingent represents all of the police protective service officers and the unsworn officers who have served on peacekeeping and other overseas humanitarian missions, as well as the police who have served with the ADF or our allies.
And following them, of course, is the Victoria Police Band. I love the tradition of bands in not only the police, but also for all of our services. They hold a very special role, don't they, Michelle?
Absolutely, and you know, whenever you see a parade, you always hear those bagpipes, and it really instills the sense of pride and nationality. Yeah.
Yeah, it really puts you in the place, and you know straight away that it's going to be a very well-oiled machine from here on in, because the band, they always have the tightest drills, and they're managing to do all of that while swinging around some pretty big instruments. Following them, the official party.
Here we are, Colonel Jason Cook leading as the marshal for this march today.
The bands sound great. For everyone listening, they'll be listening to the bagpipes, but for everyone marching, they'll be listening to the drums because they're keeping the beat so that everyone can hopefully stay in step.
It is that bass drum you can hear in the background. That's when your feet need to be hitting the ground exactly at the time that the bass drummer strikes the drum.
Because you don't want to be out of step when you're on TV.
Do not. The only way to change a step is to do a quick change step, which looks like a little skip. And while it does fix the problem, it does look a little silly.
Yes.
It's so brilliant to see people with so many medals. I've only got a lowly 3, unfortunately, but I think it gets to a point where it gets quite heavy on the chest, doesn't it?
Well, you still serve, Nate, and thank you for your service.
Now, this year is incredibly important because 110 years now since the landings at Gallipoli. That means that it's a significant one to mark. Adrian, can you tell us about that day? I mean, I know you weren't there.
I was not, but one of my great uncles was. 7th Battalion landed at Gallipoli near Fisherman's Hut. So I'm part of the northern end of the landing beach. It was a bit chaotic and disorganised, I think, for those who were landing. And moving up into the hills was extremely difficult. Obviously, fighting uphill is obviously much harder than fighting downhill, and the Turks were obviously in prepared positions.
Right, it certainly is the one event that really defined Australia in so many ways, and it brought us together with New Zealand in a way that is unshakable from here.
And we just saw the New Zealand representation going past there, and you know that is the origin of Anzac.
Now, of course, 110 years since the landings at Gallipoli, but actually there are a lot of anniversaries being marked this year in 2025. 80 years since the end of World War II. That's another, the war that was meant to help end all wars since then, right? But unfortunately, of course, conflicts haven't stopped.
But in the memory of people, when I like talking to people about what Anzac Day means to them, and most people have got a story about a family relative who served in World War II.
Yeah. And that, of course, is going to become a more distant family member from here on in. Fewer and fewer people survive from that time, but it is important that we remember their contributions because it was such a big contribution from Australia, from it's similar to World War I, right? A fairly small country that really carried more than its weight.
And certainly the statistics don't lie. So the 1911 census had 4,455,000 odd people in Australia, which is less than Victoria now. So when we think about 416,000 people enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force, that's a 38% of Australian male population between 18 and 44. So the significance of the First World War, the Great War, and particularly the beginning at Gallipoli for us can't be underestimated.
Yeah, and the Second World War figures are similarly extraordinary. The population's about 7 million in Australia at the time. 965,000 Australians enlisted and served in uniform. About 85,000 of those women.
Yeah.
So it's 1 in 7 almost are in uniform, which I find astounding.
It's just incredible. Of course, the service continued from there, and we've seen many, many conflicts, but increasingly over the years, the military's been changing its focus somewhat more to what we used to call, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we used to call it DAC, Defence Aid to the Civil Community sort of taskings, which usually, at least when I was serving, were with our close neighbours in the region, but increasingly now it's the military helping out Australians, because we saw them helping with when Tropical Cyclone Tracy absolutely devastated Darwin, but they're still dealing with cyclones now, even just this year, right? Tropical Cyclone Alfred, we saw a great response from the military.
Indeed, and what we've got on the screen is obviously the Signals Corps marching, and it is their centenary.
Now, for those that maybe haven't served in the military, what's the Signals Corps?
Comms.
Yeah.
think everything to do with communications, and from the original origins we've seen on movies like Gallipoli, The Runners, and then to radios, and now into the cyber domain. So full spectrum.
And communications are absolutely vital. That's the only way we get anything done, isn't it, James?
Absolutely, and Indian artillery, critical for us. We say no comms, no bombs.
So they'll be leading the marches around the country to mark that centenary this year.
When you don't have them, you really understand the importance of it. Critical for the command and control, for commanders to be able to get anything to be done. They need that communication capability. And it was interesting in the spin-up for the Second World War, the number of signallers that they needed to get in and train.
Of course, back in the day, it was not so much electronics communications, of course, and still to this day, I know the Navy certainly, still practice those good old traditional communications techniques, running up flags up the mast and flashing lights from the bridge wings. I had to train in that myself.
And Morse code?
Yes, absolutely. I've forgotten a few, most of it now, but we had to learn.
Cable and wire back in those days, in the First World War and the Second World War. I remember reading of one unit in the Second World War that had more than 80 miles, so 130 kilometres or so of cable just to wire an infantry battalion into all its company positions.
Wow.
Extraordinary amounts of cable.
And great to see the 8th Divisional Signallers coming there, leading all the signals units in the parade today, because of course many of them would have become prisoners of war at the fall of Singapore. My grandfather was on HMAS Perth. He was a Chief Petty Officer telegraphist. So comms was definitely his thing.
Marching incredibly proudly.
And you can see on these banners where they've had their major operations, whether it's Korea, Malaya, Borneo, South Vietnam, Timor-Leste, and obviously the Middle East more recently. Australian Army Band.
Now that's the job I want, the cymbals. Actually, I was a Navy cadet in my youth, and was part of the band. I got to do quite a few things. Snare drum, cymbals is where I started, but yeah, bit of snare drum. That's my real home.
Right.
All right, so for people who don't necessarily know the Army uniform, what are you looking out for? What have they got to get exactly right to be perfect?
Well, lots of starch, boot polish, and Brasso. The smell last night in my...
the smell of Brasso.
Oh, yes, to get everything just schmick. And you can see the slouch hat there. Everyone's wearing the Rising Sun. That Rising Sun says the Australian Army, and that came in 1991. Previously, it was the Australian Commonwealth Forces. No, Australian Commonwealth Military Forces. So that's what I was issued back in 1989. So I've still got that. But you can see this contingent, absolutely resplendent.
And with the cutlasses there, why do they carry cutlasses? We're not really doing any sword combat these days, are we?
Well, the officers carry the swords,
Yeah.
and the troops, the contingent in the rank and file there, usually carry weapons.
But it's all very symbolic rather than
Yes.
practical these days, right?
Yes.
And these will be the signallers based out at Simpson Barracks.
Yes. The Defence Force School of Signals. So that's a tri-service organisation. They train all signallers, Navy, Army and Air Force.
Even trained me back in the day.
Oh.
Yeah, I went and learned how to do some sneaky comm stuff. That was very interesting indeed. Even though I wasn't a signaller, it's important for people across the service to have the skills.
you can tell that from their hat badge. So they've got the hat badge of the signallers, and their rank insignia will be on their shoulders.
Now, an interesting fact that the Corps was formed on the 1st of January 1925, so it is a centenary, but it's separated from the Royal Australian Engineer Corps back then, and the engineers have an annual dinner called the Waterloo Dinner, and it's tradition that a signals officer is invited every year in recognition that they were once part of the Corps. I'm sure there's a couple of other stories that James and Adrian can relay from Gallipoli with the signallers and the engineers.
There's the shrine. You can see them marching up to the forecourt. This is where I feel a little bit more comfortable now.
Navy band.
Hello to the Navy band. Looking wonderful in their uniforms. Okay, what you're looking out for here is the white lanyard, perfectly curled, and under the blue collars, you want all those buttons to be nice and shiny.
So this contingent's from HMAS Cerberus, so that's the home of the recruit, isn't it?
Certainly is, yeah. If you join as a sailor, that's where you spend your first few weeks in the Navy learning how to be part of the service. But it's also the home to our seamanship school, so I've also been there training as well. Cerberus is a beautiful, very, very old base here in Victoria. And yeah, it's one of those places you kind of dread when you have to go a little bit, if it's winter.
Oh, yeah.
Because it gets bitterly cold.
They'll have their contingent every month. We have contingent of the RAAF recruits come to the Shrine of Remembrance, and this Sunday there'll be about 150 of them coming here to have a tour and a talk, so learning some of their own history.
That's the thing, when you join an organisation like the military, it does come with such a long history that informs so much of what you do every day. Adrian, how important is it for people to understand that military history?
I think it's critical. You can't understand today, and you can't understand anything about or an inkling of the future if you don't understand where you have come from. I remember basic training at Kapooka many years ago. We were taken one of the days at Kapooka. We were bussed in, because Kapooka's in southern New South Wales, we were bussed into the Australian War Memorial. And all of us with our very short haircuts were given a tour of the Australian War Memorial. I already had a passion for Australian military history even at that stage, but yeah, for many of my fellow recruits, it was the first time they'd been there. And I think it was helped to trigger an understanding of, yes, you are arriving in this organisation in whatever year it is, 1990, 2010, but that it has a massive history. And I think, yeah, to understand how special it is, you need to look back at that history, no matter which of the services we are talking about.
Because each of our service members carries that responsibility, don't they, of that history and moving forward from where we've been, but remembering that they have to carry that and that convey the importance of the military.
I think those customs and traditions are really important. The more you learn the history, the more you learn the specific components of your service, the adversity, things that soldiers, sailors or airmen have gone through in prior conflicts. I think it sort of sets you up for that resilience mindset.
Actually, speaking of airmen, here is the Air Force Band.
And this will be a contingent from RAAF Williams over there in Point Cook and Laverton. Some Army aviators.
So how does aviation vary? Because all three services have aircraft. Why don't we all just pilot into the RAAF? Well, it's because of the various places we have to serve, right? Like, it's very different landing a helicopter on the back of a ship versus in the middle of the desert versus an airport.
Indeed.
You need specialised skills.
Yes, naval aviation is not for the faint-hearted, so I've been told.
Hey, I have been winched up from the back of a ship and dropped back down onto it safely. I can tell you, I am very glad for the high level of expertise of our pilots. I was absolutely freaking out as I was in the air, being lowered down onto the back of a minehunter. So not even a particularly big target, and being lowered down over Jarvis Bay and just hoping that they were going to nail the landing. And they did, luckily.
Yeah, that would have been quite a ride.
It was a heck of a ride. You know, you need to go and do aviation checks and essentially get qualified again after a ship's been in refit for a while or been, you know, not doing active service for a while. So you need to go and make sure that everything's up to scratch. Somebody had to be winched up, and I was the junior officer, so I didn't have much say in it.
So we've got some peacekeeping operations being represented here. And we saw Somalia go past there, some veterans from that operation.
Yeah, I was going to say that Australians can regard themselves as the original peacekeepers. In 1947, the very first United Nations peacekeeping operation was led by Australians to what was then the Dutch East Indies, and obviously transitioning to become the nation of Indonesia. So we have a long and proud tradition of all three services being deployed on peacekeeping operations since then.
And we've got here, so this is joint and UN operations, and there are many different groups represented here. But everyone from even the domestic operators, we've had Operation Flood Assist, COVID-19, bushfire assistance. Earlier this year, you know, Alfred, Tropical Cyclone Alfred, that bothered Queensland. There was a military response there helping to provide aid and get people in and out and essentially do what they can to help in times of need. And that's one of the great honours of being in the military, is that sometimes you get called on to help. Every year that I was at sea, I was deployed in one fashion or another, and it was always to go and help, which I really liked.
Absolutely. That's the full spectrum of operations. And these are the drummers from, is it Caulfield Primary School? They're there every year. And they'll do 2 or 3 laps. We'll see them time and time again. Very enthusiastic.
Aren't they doing a great
Caulfield
job?
South Primary School, the drum corps.
They look and sound fantastic.
They do. Their dressing is very good. Keeping those rows and columns very neat.
Here we have the SAS. It's the so 2025 is the 60th anniversary of the first operational deployment of the Australian Special Air Service, which was to the Indonesian confrontation.
What does the Special Air Service do?
They are the elite of our special forces. So they'll carry out a range of missions, strategic reconnaissance, direct actions where they'll produce kinetic effects. They work traditionally at the strategic level. Yeah, the first SAS soldier reached Brunei in February 1965 while cross-border operations into Indonesia's Kalimantan had been taking place before the Australians arrived in Borneo, and participation was limited to experienced troops. The Australian SAS's first patrol took place on the Malaysian side of the border and were mainly intended to obtain topographical information on tracks, rivers and villages, as well as conducting surveillance of known border crossing points and shadowing Indonesian infiltrators.
What we're seeing now is the Royal Australia Regiment and the number of battalions that comprise that regiment. It was formed in 1948 and it was raised from the 34th Brigade, which was part of the British Commonwealth Occupational Force in Japan. And it consisted then of the 1st, 2nd and 3rd battalions of the RAAF. And it expanded for Vietnam and the Vietnam War, and it had 9 battalions.
So How big was the Australian Army to have the 34th Brigade?
Well, exactly. That's the Second World War, yes. And here we are, we have the pipes and drums of the 5th 6th Battalion of the Royal Victoria Regiment. They'll do a couple of laps as well. Don't they look wonderful?
I would be too nervous to twirl those drumsticks like that in case one flew off into the crowd. All right, so break it down for the Navy boy, would you? Battalions, brigades, what's the difference between all of these?
Well, if you think of a battalion has 4 companies, of which there are 3 or 4 platoons, or, you know, and it just sort of builds up. So think 3s or 4s and just multiply. So a battalion is roughly, what,
500-600?
500 to 600 people.
Wow.
And then a brigade can be anywhere from 2,000 to 5,500, 6,000, depending on the operational need, the task at hand.
It varied over time also. In the First World War, battalions are about 1,000 men strong. In the Second World War, they're generally about 800. But by the time you get to Korea and Vietnam, yes, as Campbell has said, they're about sort of 600, 650.
Tell you what, it's very much easier in the Navy. You're in a ship. And however many people you can fit in, they all belong to that ship. The end.
There's 8 RAAF, I believe Lieutenant Colonel Neil Smith, AM, the president of the association there, and he was the ABC TV March commentator for many, many years.
Well, Leanne Wong is out on the street for us this morning, and she's with the Master of Ceremonies from this morning's dawn service. Leanne, how's it out there on the ground?
Hello, I'm here with the Dawn Service Master of Ceremonies, Justin Smith. Justin, it's your 3rd year as Master of Ceremonies. Take us through just what does this role entail?
Look, for me, it's trying to gather a few stories that are going to touch people and try to find a way to tell them. And I think it's about just think about being here together. You know, whether you're Master of Ceremonies or you're watching or you're in the march, or it's just about us being together. So I just try and focus on that, yeah.
You have quite a unique perspective as part of the commemorations. Just what have been some of the most memorable moments for you over the past few years?
For me, I think it's about the feeling of the crowd. The thing that I always remember when I'm sort of getting ready for this, it's that moment just before you start speaking. For me, I can't see anybody because of the lights, but I can't hear anybody. Like it's just so quiet, but you can feel the energy coming off them, and that's something that just always stays with me. So sort of feeling that and feeding off that, it's unique. It's a beautiful thing. It's lovely.
And just for you personally, what does Anzac Day mean to you?
Well, look, it means, I think it's so different for everybody, I think, because and this is what I think is beautiful about something like the minute silence. And there's something I said in the speech before too, is that you get just as much in the silence as you do in the ceremony, because you take that moment to think, well, look, you think about someone from World War I, might be your father from Vietnam. You know, for me, it's really just thinking about what people gave up for us, and to take a moment and think, look, they really did do. You know, they really had to leave some very tough lives at one point, and they did it for us. That's what I think about. Yeah.
Well, Justin, it was another wonderful dawn service again today. Thank you so much, and all the best for the rest of the day.
Thank you, Leanne. Thank you very much.
Leanne out there on the forecourt of the Shrine of Remembrance. It was such a beautiful service this morning. And it's reflected around the country, of course. We were so lucky to get away with no rainfall at all, and it still looks like it's holding off for now. Anzac Day always seems to be one of those days, isn't it? It's a turning point weather-wise in Australia.
Absolutely, and that's why on Anzac Day we switch to winter uniform.
Mm-hmm. Except for in the tropics.
Oh, yes.
Because who wants to be wearing woolen pants in 34-degree heat in Darwin?
But here we are in Melbourne. Look at that shrine. Absolutely looking wonderful.
In fact, if anything, the cloud is welcome because it helps hold off the sun. How often have you had to be standing there in your perfectly black shoes and they start to hit about 120 degrees and your feet start melting? But a cloud always welcome.
Yeah, the weather's perfect today for a march. Glorious weather.
So the dawn service this morning, you reckon there was 50,000 people?
Yeah, so that's
fantastic.
10,000 up on last year's numbers, which is quite incredible, especially given the threat of wet weather. But people just turned out anyway, and bigger and better than before. I think any diminished numbers from those years of which we will not mention, just a few years ago, 19 related perhaps. Yeah, I think we can say that's well and truly gone.
Well, for the viewers at home, I mean, there's capacity to come to the dawn service. When the Shrine of Remembrance was opened in 1934, there were 300,000 people.
Yeah,
so the Shrine Reserve is huge. I think that really reflects community sentiment and that wanting to pay their respects, and what an ideal place to come, the Shrine of Remembrance. Its purpose is for commemoration and memorials.
And it's such a beautiful building, but also, you do an about turn and you've got the beautiful skyline of Melbourne behind you. It really is in a prime position. Look at that skyline. Oh.
So we just had the 9 hour go past, and with the end of the Vietnam War, it was then linked with 8 RAAF. So we have 8-9 RAAF.
Speaking of anniversaries, actually, and of Vietnam, this year marks 50 years since the reunification. In fact, that'll be marked on Wednesday, on the 30th of April. That will be a very important day for many Australians who were involved in the conflict in Vietnam.
Absolutely. I remember coming back from Afghanistan, and then in 2015 we had a welcome home parade along here, coming up to the shrine, and at the end of the parade all the Vietnam veterans were around, and once we were fallen out from that parade, we were just interacting with the Vietnam veterans, and a number of them came up and we had hugs and there were lots of tears, and because they didn't get that welcome home parade.
Yeah.
So we were welcoming them home. It was a very moving day.
It was always touching to speak with some of the Vietnam vets, because it's still so fresh in the memory for so many. Yeah. Leanne is down on the street as well, having a chat to some of the people.
I think it's important because it shows like the history of Australians and why we're still here. Not still here, but it shows our history, and yeah, I think it's important for that.
And what can you tell me about these medals that you've got on today?
They're from when my dad was in the army. I'm not really sure what he did, but he was in the Air Force for a little bit.
Always the risk of wearing someone else's medals. I have 4 of my grandfathers that were just handed to me. Are a little bit tattered at the moment. I've got to do some investigation and find out what they are. But it's always easy to find out, because the medals are very specific, aren't they? And the ribbons convey meaning in themselves.
Absolutely. I've got my grandfather's medals and my great-grandfather's medals.
Oh, wow.
So from World War I and II. Here we have the Australian Army Training Team Vietnam. They first went operational in 1962, right through to 1972, so 10 years serving in combat in the South Vietnamese Army units, as well as being cross-assigned to US Special Forces units leading Chinese mercenaries and tribesmen, and in programs sponsored by the CIA. The teams were deployed in most provinces throughout South Vietnam, from the DMZ through to the Central Highlands to the Mekong Delta. 985 Australians served in the team, 33 were killed in action and 122 were wounded in action. The unit was awarded the US Army Meritorious Unit Commendation and the South Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry with Palm.
And the 4 original Victoria Crosses that Australians received during the Vietnam War were all awarded to members of the Australian Army Training Team Vietnam. Obviously, a 5th one was awarded just late last year to a member of the regiment, RAAF, but until then, those were the 4 original Victoria Crosses.
We saw Headquarters 1 Australian Task Force Association marching by before. They would have been stationed out at Nui Dat. Was at Nui Dat a couple of years ago. There's not much left of the big base.
We see the 1st Armoured Regiment Association on camera at the moment. They first deployed to Vietnam in 1967 and received battle honours for Coral, Balmoral, Ha Dic and Bien Ba. The last elements of the regiment withdrew from Vietnam in September 1971.
They operated the British-made Centurion tanks.
In the jungle, how'd that go?
I think they had troubles earlier because not designed really for that sort of heat. But as a force multiplier and to protect infantry, they're phenomenal, obviously. The firepower that they can provide saved many, many infantrymen's lives.
And they would have relied extensively on the light aid detachment, which is coming up behind them. So they would have been ensuring that the tanks were running in tip-top mechanical order.
It's the 4th 19th Prince of Wales's Light Horse Regiment Association. An Army Reserve unit in the 4th Brigade, and their lineage goes back to the First World War.
So great to see the young fellow walking there. You know, families hold on to their military connections for a long time, don't they? And even as those conflicts get further into the past, and unfortunately fewer and fewer of the people remain with us, still families really carry on that tradition and that link back to the military.
And certainly a number of primary schools now are adopting a unit to keep the history alive, and so they've researched it, and you know, that means that the young children are understanding where we've come from, and that'll inform their future.
Hopefully making decisions to avoid some of the conflicts we've seen in the past, and the only way you can ensure that is by remembering what's gone.
That looks like the band of Wesley College. They're sounding great today.
Very good. Don't know how I'd be feeling about wielding a tuba in a marching band.
Pretty heavy.
That has to be hard work.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some really ingenious rigging going on to help support the weight there.
Here come the Royal Australian Engineers. Play a very important part on the battlefield, allowing our forces to manoeuvre and denying the enemy the opportunity to do the same.
What does that look like practically?
So they'll go in and so if the enemy has placed a minefield, they will demine that. That's very difficult work. They'll blow breaches in obstacles, or they'll put obstacles out. So typically you'd think barbed wire. Anything to be able to slow the enemy down from manoeuvre, particularly in front of your defensive position.
Of course, those skills directly transferable in peacetime when they're going in to help aid.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. So they'll do construction work, repairing roads,
building bridges.
Bridging is an important part of it, very important part.
But also water purification, or also think of the tunnel rats in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm. The sunburst.
And the cadets today doing a fantastic job carrying all of those banners. But the cadets are an amazing organisation.
Yeah.
Both of my kids went through cadets, and it made a huge difference for them. Gave them excellent communication skills, leadership skills.
Yeah, a little bit of discipline, but it's still a heck of a lot of fun.
So they both loved it.
Yeah.
They both loved it. And they got so much out of it. You can see them develop as young adults.
Mm-hmm. Being given some responsibilities and a framework to work in.
Absolutely.
It's yeah, really, really useful. Now, how on earth do you get kids get with bagpipes? They must have smaller sized bagpipes, surely.
I'd hope so.
They're sounding great, though.
I think that's a feature of the march, is the amount of bands that support the marching down Swanston Street all the way to the shrine. They come from many different schools and associations, and it's just terrific to hear those bagpipes.
Of course, originally drums were used to help convey the orders, right? That was a bit of communications for when, back in the day, it was about the only thing that could carry far enough. But nowadays, bands more bringing joy and light and that air of military importance to events like this, but also, our military bands are overseas often supporting our people on deployment, just giving them a taste of home and a little bit of relief from the very important work they're doing.
Here we see OTU Skyville, the Officer Training Unit, which commenced in 1965, and this was to train the second lieutenants as the Army started to mobilise as under the National Service Scheme.
Yeah, it was a 22-week course, nearly 6 months, often referred to as a bit of a pressure cooker. Notably, there were many graduates, obviously, and there was one Major General, 13 brigadiers, and a couple of notable graduates, Tim Fisher, the late Tim Fisher, and Jeff Kennett, our former Premier of Victoria.
Yeah, very demanding curriculum over those 22 weeks.
And they're followed by the National Servicemen's Association, so enlisted men who were called up either starting from 1964 when the National Service Act was put in place again, to originally really for the fear about what was happening with Indonesia, but then obviously that then segues into the Vietnam War and needing to have greater numbers of particularly infantry to serve in the Vietnam War as the commitment to Vietnam expands.
And there's a number of national servicemen that didn't deploy, who did their national service here in Australia. So there was a lot of service. Here we have the Royal Australian Engineers Association, led by Lieutenant Colonel Don Hughes. And we were speaking about engineers just before.
Notice a lot of people walking with assistance dogs or marching in wheelchairs, being pushed often by somebody a good bit younger, but also in cars, because of course some people aren't as mobile as maybe they once were, but it's still so important for them to get to Anzac Day. And of course, for some people that won't be possible. And hopefully you're watching along at home as well and seeing your mates still out here, and hopefully you'll be able to get together with them a little bit later on today too.
You can see the cars in the march, and they are transporting those that are less mobile or can't make the march that length. So we rely on the support of some of these drivers and their vehicles to get the veterans up. And look at that, they're having a great time, engaging with the spectators there.
For many of the veterans, it is such a big day. And of course, there's ceremonies going on all throughout the country. I think particularly, I love going to some of the small country town ones because you can see that they've been together, they've been coming together for years and years and years. They all know it, and they shared that service.
Yeah. And the thing is, you can rock up to an Anzac Day parade not at your home and still find a mate, even if it's a new mate. Someone's always willing to have a chat about the good old days.
Yep.
About what you went through and what you had to put up with, how bad the food was, or good the scran was if you're in the Navy.
Scran. Here we have the Health Services Association, so that includes medical, dental, nursing and psychology corps.
Of course, that's another one of the major support arms that you really need when you're either deployed or even just at home in times of peace. Of course, keeping people as healthy in all aspects as possible, crucial to a really good fighting force.
And here we have the Royal Australian Army Ordnance Corps. That was my corps. And it's one of the largest corps within the Army, and it has 6 specialist career pathways and is responsible for a wide range of logistic tasks supporting Australian Defence Force. So they include parachute maintenance, very important, and that is inspection, repack, repair and deployment. So fuel management, that was my speciality, bulk fuels. Also construction, personnel administration, business management, supply chain management, warehousing, management of equipment, vehicles and weapons, demolition and disposal of explosives, very important, salvage of battle-damaged equipment and provision of essential services for hospitals and troops in the field.
They always say don't annoy the chefs. I'm going to update that. Don't annoy the parachute maintainers.
Yes. If we think about the classes of supply, classes 1, 3 of alive, 1, 3 and 5 keep the troops alive. So 1 being subsistence, that's your food, water, that sort of thing. And then your POL and then your ammunition.
Waltzing Matilda in the mix. Oh, you love it, don't you?
It's fantastic.
And speaking of women in the military, the face of that has changed over the years, hasn't it? Very, very much. I mean, of course, now women are able to join as anyone else would, but in times past, there were specific organisations, specific arms of each of the military, or each of the defence forces to cater for women specifically.
So, yes, the Women's Royal Australian Naval Service, the RANS.
The RANS,
yes. RAAF, the Women's Royal Australian Army Corps, which was disbanded in 1986, and I joined in 89, so it was brand new to have women in the Army, and that's my lifetime.
Yeah.
It's quite amazing.
How did you find it?
I knew no different, so
Yeah.
it really didn't, you know. I was trained at Monash University Regiment, and it was all infantry training, officer training.
Yep.
And we were trained by Vietnam vets. They were pretty harsh.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But for a very good reason. Yeah, they'd been there, done that, and you know, really focused you on what was important.
So we just saw the A Battery Association pass along. They are Australia's oldest continually serving military unit. They were established in 1871.
Wow, 1871.
Henry Green was Australia's first enlisted soldier. His regimental number was 001, and he served in A Battery.
Easy one to remember.
Yep.
Go. There's a lot of, I guess, conjecture as to the origins, because a lot of the colonial military history goes back to, you know, 1840s, 1850s, and certainly the Royal Victoria Regiment has origins way back to Melbourne Rifles and the Royal Melbourne Regiment and the Gippsland Regiment and Mildura Regiment.
Yes.
Adrian, does your historical persuasion take you back that far?
My interest really are the First and Second World Wars, but I'm now moving forwards into the Cold War conflicts. So I've been looking at Australia's involvement in Malaya, Borneo, Korea and Vietnam. But it is fascinating. I mean, people may not understand that from 1788 to 1870, the defence of Australia was provided by British line regiments. There was no Australian Defence Force because obviously Australia had not been founded.
Yeah.
It's just the different colonies. So there were colonial militias, obviously, as well.
That's what I was
that's what you were referring to, yes. But the image of red coats, or the idea of red coats, that was a thing in Australia, and some Australians do not recognise that, or don't really know that about our history.
I think it's also interesting to think that the defence of the nation was viewed so strongly that many of those early colonial militia units paid for their own equipment and uniforms.
Wow, imagine that. Rocking up to work and having to make sure you... Well, that's actually part of how uniforms came to look how they did, right? And once upon a time, they weren't all precisely the same. You just kind of did the best you could to get as close as you could to what was expected.
Absolutely. We've been very well served with the bands.
Very well this year. That was a youth band there, and all looking great, sounding even better.
There we go, look at that, isn't that fantastic? Look at that smile, so proud.
So now we're moving from, we've just seen joint and UN operations and a number of units there. We're moving to the Navy.
Yes, we are.
So over to you,
Navy,
Nate.
once Navy, always Navy, fall in astern. That means get behind me. Come on, we're off.
And as the senior service, why is that, Nate?
Oh, well, tradition. As with everything, we carry it from the UK, but it is good to note that it is the senior tradition, should always lead, should always. It's just because navies, you know, they're incredibly old and took a lot more work. You know, once upon a time for an army, if you needed to build one, you just have a quick whip around. Look, navy's the same to a certain extent, but you can't just put people on a ship and hope for the best. You need some a little bit more expertise when it comes to navigating.
So we're just seeing the Naval Warfare Officers Association just previously.
That was one of the potential specialisations I was going to go for before I made it very, very clear that no, I would be heading down a meteorological and oceanographic route. But a lot of my mates ended up as warfare officers.
It was great that the Navy sponsored you through that. Because we're the beneficiary now of your expertise every morning as to what the weather's going to do.
Well, the military needs to, the Navy specifically needs to have its own forecasters, because ships can go everywhere and the Bureau of Meteorology just looks after the Australian station. And you can't always rely on forecasts from some of the more remote places. Even if you're in the middle of the Indian Ocean or the Pacific, the Navy still needs to know what's going on so they can launch a boat or a helicopter or just navigate safely. So that's why they've got their own relatively small group of forecasters. And yeah, I got to be one of them.
It was the Submarine Association that marched before us, and aren't they an important part of the Navy, particularly today and looking forward?
Yeah, very much, very much. Our submariners, they're a different breed. You've got to be a very special person who says, I'm willing to go without windows for an extended period of time. And not too many showers either, if you can avoid it. I've spent a couple of trips on a submarine, actually. I was very lucky. As my first vessel to ever get on was HMAS Rankin. And that boat, we went from Perth round to Sydney. I spent a week and a half under the water. And it was an incredible experience.
Did you get cabin fever?
I did not. You've got more space than you might think.
Yeah.
You know, if you can deal with being on a flight, a submarine is nothing. I did have to sleep in a torpedo storage. So they, torpedo rack. They put down a mattress, and that's where I slept. It was quite the experience. But I tell you what, coming back up and seeing the sun and not through a periscope, that decision, that time made me decide very squarely that I respected submariners. I thought they did an amazing job and that I would never be one. All right, Fleet Air Arm coming through.
So the Fleet Air Arm, that's former and serving naval aviation personnel. They maintain bonds of friendship and esprit de corps in that naval aviation, and they assist the current serving naval aviators. That's a bit of a mouthful.
It is. And then they were followed by the HMAS Melbourne Association. That the story of the Melbourne really still sits quite heavily with the military. I've just realised I've got to relearn something. HMAS, Her Majesty's Australian ship, must be his now.
I know.
Yep. Yes.
Yeah.
Right, do correct me if I happen to get it wrong.
Now the HMAS Sydney Association's on your screens. There's actually been 5 Sydneys over the history of Australia. Probably the most famous one, I guess, the 2 most famous ones, obviously the First World War in the battle against the Emden, sinking the German raider. But obviously in the Second World War, the tragic loss of HMAS Sydney on the 19th of November 1941 off the Western Australian coast. But for Vietnam veterans, it was known as the Vung Tau Ferry, so the aircraft carrier that carried troops to and from Vietnam for many, many years. So that was HMAS Sydney 3. So a very famous name in our naval history.
They're having a good day, aren't they?
Yep.
Oh, wouldn't you? And that beautiful sun with the music going on and all the people clapping.
Yep.
HMAS Hobart. Oh. That's the way to do an Anzac march. Get carried up the road.
Yes.
Manoora. Well, Warramunga first of all, but then Manoora. My sister served in HMAS Manoora. And that was the vessel I was supposed to go on instead of the submarine as a trainee. But it got deployed, and so we got thrown around the fleet.
They did quite a bit of service in East Timor in the early 2000s.
Yes. Manura and Canimbla, both.
Yep. Which are famous names because they were originally armed merchant cruisers in the Second World War, and then LSIs, landing ship infantry, supported many of Australian and American amphibious landings throughout 1943 to 1945. But yes, their namesake is obviously a more modern ship also that you're referring to in East Timor.
Voyager here, that's one of the groups that people will always tell you if they served in Voyager. And HMAS Yarra, that's a ship that I served in as a mine hunter. Well, I say as a mine hunter, it is a mine hunter, but there have been several Yarras before.
Yes, I think it's actually a nice tradition that the Australian Navy does that. There are numbers, ships the same name, that as you can see there, 2, 3 and 4.
Yep.
To continue those traditions.
Yeah, M87. So HMAS Yarra is where I got my ticket to drive ships. That's where I was qualified when I went from being a trainee to finally having some skill. And then I had to drive through the Great Barrier Reef. We won't talk about how many times we nearly came a cropper because we didn't, because I was very well trained. Secretary College Band here.
And the banners that are coming through now are for the heavy cruisers that the Australian Navy had during the Second World War. We just saw HMAS Australia, and then followed by the Canberra, who was lost at the Battle of Savo Island in 1942 off Guadalcanal, and HMAS Shropshire, which was, I guess, not donated, but sort of seconded from the Royal Navy to the Australian Navy after the loss of Canberra. And so the Shropshire basically had a crew of Royal Navy, but Royal Australian Navy sailors, sort of a half and half their complement.
And they retained the name Shropshire.
They retained the name Shropshire. There are a couple of other destroyers that the British did. Again, I don't know whether the term is correct to be donate, but were seconded to the Australian Navy, and we changed the names of them. But no, the Shropshire kept its original name.
I don't imagine we'd name a new vessel Shropshire today, though.
No. It's a weird stat. It's the one and only ship in Royal Navy history that's been called the Shropshire, or named after that county. There's never been one before and hasn't been one since.
Wow. HMAS Warrego there.
There's destroyers and minesweepers now and frigates that are coming through. If anybody's been down to Williamstown, you can obviously visit HMAS Castlemaine, one of the last surviving naval vessels from the Second World War. One of the more unusual units, that one, the DEMS, the defensively equipped merchant ships. So obviously during the Second World War, our convoys were under predation by Japanese or German either aircraft or submarines or surface vessels. And so one of the solutions was to put gun crews, mount 4-inch or 5-inch guns on merchant ships and station a gun crew on them. Provide some measure of protection against enemy forces.
HMAS Australia.
Another one of those critical landing vessels to supporting obviously amphibious operations, moving troops to shore, both the United States, as you saw on some of those banners, and also Australian troops earlier in 43.
Of course, that name was used again for one of our oilers that served until 2006. People may remember the name Westralia from an horrific incident that happened on board that ship.
Hyde Street Youth Band, they're looking and sounding fantastic as well. BCOF, the British Commonwealth Occupation Force. So these were the troops who, after the end of the Second World War, went to Japan. And were there till around 40s.
8?
Well, they started drawing down once you get to the late 1940s. So 1948, yes, 2 of the 3 battalions returned to Australia and 2 of the 3 fighter squadrons returned to Australia, leaving only 77 there. And of the naval vessels, again, 2 or 3 of them, leaving only 1 there. But it fully comes to an end in 1952.
I'm so glad to have you 3 as my offsiders. Like, do you know, I love military history, but for some reason it doesn't stick in my head. The numbers, it's not what my brain's built for. So I'm so glad yours are.
Well, I'm glad we've got James and Adrian here because, yeah, I've got lots of notes, but these guys are walking encyclopedias, so yeah, thank you very much.
What you can't see at home is the lean into each other saying, oh, was it this year? Was it that year? They're very much in conversation.
And back to the army now with field regiments. So generally in the Second World War, if it's got the 2 at the front, so the 2/11 means it's a 2nd AIF, so a 2nd Australian Imperial Force unit, so served in the Second World War, would have been armed with 25 pounders, but I can probably leave that to James, you know, more, we won't call them the drop shorts.
No,
as an infantryman.
Definitely don't do that. You can also tell that their 2nd AIF, there'll be a grey outline around their unit badge.
What's the significance of that? Or is it just what they did?
You'll be able to tell what unit. So just by looking at the hat, you'll be able to tell what unit they're from, and which also means what corps as well. So whether they're infantry, armour. And it's great seeing the kids.
It is. For those of you that don't know, the medals worn on the right, they're the medals from your ancestors, perhaps your parents or your grandparents or beyond. So that little fella hadn't been through that many conflicts because they were on the right side of his chest. The medals worn on the left are yours. The slouch hat is such a unique design, isn't it?
Well, it is and it isn't.
Yeah.
You know, it's fur felt, but there are other nations like New Zealand, Canada, the Gurkhas, who also have a slouch hat of type.
Of sort, yeah.
Yeah, Field Marshal Montgomery liked to rock the slouch hat.
There you go. I'd like to see a photo of that.
You might notice a lot of people having that red and white striped medal. That's the Australian Defence Medal. Now that's given to people who have served, I believe, at least 4 years. That was created to help mark the service of a lot of people who were conscripted or maybe weren't eligible for other medals but still made significant contributions.
And certainly in the permanent forces, the sign-on is, or for Army, is 4 years. So, yeah.
But of course, there were some groups of people in the past who were pulled off the streets, sent to serve, and then brought home and kicked out. Thank you very much, no more. So it lets them recognise that service. Meanwhile, Leanne Wong has been out and about on the streets, speaking with more people here.
Well, I'm here with Bob Brady, who has quite a special tribute to his father. Bob, do you want to just tell us a bit about this chair next to us?
Well, this beautiful man. Oh, I'm sorry. He fought for us in World War II in New Guinea for 4.5 years. He was the last remaining SIGS vet. He passed away August last year, so we miss him so much, but he got to 101.7 and he was just a genuine, beautiful father, grandfather, great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, and we're just so proud of him. And this is the way we thought, well, come on, let's honour Dad for his last March. So
He's left a remarkable legacy. So
he has.
You've brought along an empty chair for him.
Yes, he's sitting there. I can see him sitting there with a big smile on his face saying, "Why are you silly devils being tearful? I'm having a ball." And that was my dad. He loved a joke. He drove up until 4 months before he passed. He lived by himself. He looked after himself. He sacked the cleaner because I can do a better job. That was my dad. And his mate, Len, what a beautiful man. And oh, look, I'm just so proud. And I'm proud to be here. And this is a beautiful day. We're not here celebrating war. We're here celebrating the lives of our diggers. That's what it's all about.
Well, it's wonderful, Bob, that you've been commemorating your father's service and his sacrifice. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Oh, so lovely to hear. And look at those skies holding blue over, well, with a bit of cloud, over the Shrine of Remembrance here in Melbourne. The march very much underway, and we've been just seeing so many people lining the streets to clap as these really proud groups of ex-service people march along from the Flinders Street station down here to the shrine this morning. Thank goodness that weather is holding, huh?
There's a lady with the Vietnam scarf on with the Australian flag. Good patriotism.
Now, of course, a lot of the people we're seeing here are ex-service people, but Anzac Day also commemorates and really says thank you to our service people who are currently serving. Less and less in the modern times are they seeing active service than maybe, you know, during World War I and World War II, but instead we tend to be helping out more when there are natural disasters, when something goes wrong. And of course, the Vanuatu earthquake, we saw the RAAF come and really provide a lot of assistance. Being good neighbours and using our capabilities, which are designed for war, but turning them to defence aid is really vital, isn't it?
Well, it's all about our neighbours and relationships. And if we've got strong relationships, you know, in a time of crisis, you know, we can bond together and work very efficiently together. So, like I said, the full spectrum of operations starts with, you know, in our backyard, defence aid to the civil community that we've seen with bushfires and flood assist. But we are the force of last resort. So it's when the state resources reach capacity, or it's very small, finite point in time, all the way through to what we're seeing on the screen, the humanitarian aid and disaster relief of our neighbours. And, you know, why wouldn't you help your neighbour? That's what good corporate citizens do. And then through to peacekeeping, peace monitoring, and then through to warfare. And that's the full spectrum and the flexibility of the Defence Force.
Yeah, those skills are incredible and able to be pointed in different directions, right? The skills you have to get supply lines into a forward operating base versus into a disaster hit area, they're essentially the same.
And usually the support elements, whether it's health or fixing a vehicle or getting food, the chefs, the cooks, love the cooks, you know, it doesn't matter whether it's whatever on the spectrum you're in, the task is still the same. The threat might be a bit different.
And for a lot of people in disaster, in a disaster-affected place, seeing the military rock up can be so comforting.
Absolutely, yeah, and we saw that. I'm a veteran of 3 bushfires, so 2003, 2009, and the most recent one, 19 and 20. And you know, when people are in need and they see uniforms, whether it's ours or the CFA, SES, it just provides that level of comfort and assurity.
Yeah.
You know, to keep the community bonded and knitted together, that's you know, a great thing that we can do.
It is absolutely vital to know that you're being looked after, isn't it? And actually looking after us is Leanne Wong, who's been down chatting with more people.
Well, I'm here with Brigadier John Holloway as well as his daughter Anna, both of whom are taking part in this year's Anzac Day March. John, to you first, what's it like to be leading the march?
Yeah, look, today was a really special event for me and an absolute highlight as far as any Anzac Day I've been part of. The community ability to get around Anzac Day and really demonstrate that public support for it really did demonstrate to me that the Anzac spirit is alive and well in Melbourne. Yeah.
And Anna, you've yet to march, but are you very excited?
Yes, definitely. It's a real privilege to march here, and it's with my Girl Guide unit, so yeah.
And John, you know, you've done many Anzac Days in the past, but what does it mean to you personally?
Yeah, I think Anzac Day really is a time to honour the service, the sacrifice, and indeed the courage of the veterans that have served, and also to reflect on the current serving day men and women of the ADF, and really reflect on how we can continue their legacy through the story of Anzac and how we live and embody those values on a day-to-day basis. Certainly the idea around courage, around endurance and indeed mateship, which I think sits at the centre of a lot of what the Anzac story is about, is something that I think as a community, not just in defence, we can continue to embody and go through every day. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for chatting to me, John, and as well as thank you to you, Anna. All the best for the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Oh, Anna's so proud of her dad there. That's lovely.
I've got 3 kids, and growing up, used to take the kids to the dawn service, and you know, they put their little collar and tie on and coat, and really enjoyed it. I think they really enjoyed though the bacon and egg rolls.
Oh, that is the bit. Look, actually, should we explain the gunfire breakfast? Yeah, which is tradition. Although it's a tradition I've had to break with because I've got commentating duties.
Likewise.
Tell us about the gunfire breakfast. Go for it, Adrian.
Oh, the RSL, I guess, if you go to a local RSL, as you mentioned, country RSLs, after the dawn service, you have to be able to find a bread roll with a bacon and egg sandwich. Hopefully a cup of tea at that hour of the day rather than a beer, I imagine.
Well, I don't know about you lot, but for us, the tradition is coffee with spiked with a bit of rum. Typically in the Navy, that was just
Navy.
it was just to make the what we call pusser's dust, the instant coffee, palatable.
That's a tradition that's quite strong in Army as well, I can assure you.
Yeah. Just a nip, just a little. Like you've still got to get through the march, right? But often it does help, especially when you don't have beautiful cloud cover like we've had today, and you end up with a particularly freezing cold morning.
Yeah, I think the coldest I've been was as an officer cadet. I did a cenotaph party, cataflag party, down on the point of Cows at Phillip Island, and it was about 4 degrees at 5:30 in the morning, and we were in battle dress back in the day, but wow, I've never been so cold.
So the catafalque party, that's the group that stand around a point of memorial or a shrine and with their weapons standing very, very still and not moving. So you can't even, the best you can do is wiggle your toes to keep warm, right?
Absolutely, yes. And every town that you go to around Victoria, you will see a monument in the town centre, in the main street, and the dawn services that are occurring, that occurred this morning around Victoria, you know, a lot of them are now done by the cadets, school cadets, whether they're Navy, Army or Air Force cadets, and you know, their drill is amazing.
Yeah, they are. Well, you know, it's one of the easiest activities to get kids to do.
Yeah.
Muck around, see if you can all do this in time.
Yes.
It's brilliant. It is, I think, really important to note as well that in towns all around the country there are monuments. there's barely a town that I can remember going through where I haven't seen some sort of memorial. And that's because, especially in World War I and World War II, we drew from those little towns. You know, people came from literally across the nation.
Absolutely. And like I said earlier, that, you know, we were a nation of 4.5 million people, and we had 400-odd thousand people serve, so it was quite significant. And people didn't have the means to go over to the battlefields of Europe to go and visit their fallen. So the monuments were so important for them to pay their respects and commemorate.
So here we see the 39th Battalion. They fought, they were the first to fight the Japanese on the Kokoda track, and about 7 days after, they were addressed by the CO, Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Honor, and he said to them, "Now, I don't know a lot of you by name, but I know you. We met at Ishirava. We fought there together, and every step of the way here. Now we are relieved, and we leave the battle. And every day the enemy supply line stretches further. He suffers now as you have suffered. The battle we fought for the track may have just saved your nation. At Imada, we will stop him. The Brigadier wants you to know your gallantry, your courage, your fortitude are an inspiration. And I want you to know that you are some of the finest soldiers that I have ever seen. You have seen things in this place that no man should witness. And some of these things you must forget. But history will remember you, and in the years to come, others will wish that they had your conviction. And remember the glory is not an exaltation of war, but an exaltation of men. Man's nobility made transcendent in the fiery crucible of war. Faithfulness and fortitude, gentleness and compassion, I am honoured to be your brother." I think that's one of the best speeches that's been given by a CO to a unit, particularly given everything that they did on the Kokoda track. And they were a militia battalion.
Mm. It's not just the cadets either, is it? The scouts getting involved too every year.
Yep, scouts and girl guides too, I think, down there.
"103 years old, that's
Gordon Nichols,
Gordon
congratulations. Thank you for your service, sir.
In 1922 he would have been born. He would have seen some changes.
Very much. That's incredible. And still making it to Anzac Day. That just tells you a little bit about the drive, doesn't it, for returned service people to mark this day.
Just how important it is.
Looking at obviously Second World War units now, this is marching under the banner of the 6th Division, so the first division to be raised at the start of the Second World War, because obviously in the First World War we had divisions 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So in the Second World War, the Australian Army raised the 6th, 7th, 8th and 9th divisions for the regular army, and obviously there were also later on in the war CMF divisions as well, 3rd, 5th, 7th and 11th.
So between the wars, those divisions were disbanded?
Yes, continued as citizens militia force units. So I guess today's equivalent of the Army Reserve units. So nominally those units still existed in each of those states, but when war broke out, instead of, I guess, re-raising those militia units from the states, they decided to raise a second AIF. So you had to start with the 6th Division, as I said, because 1 through 5 had already existed. And so that's why when you get so the first battalion that you raise to go in the 6th Division is the 2nd 1st, because you already had a 1st Division, so you have 2nd 1st, 2nd 2nd, and on. I know it gets very confusing.
I was going to say, where's all of this military streamlined, make sense stuff?
Well, that actually makes sense.
It does.
Yeah.
You just need to be an expert in maths.
Yeah. So yeah, these units here are a part of the 6th Division. So field companies, commando units, and obviously infantry battalions.
You can see there as well some smaller medals being worn. There are the miniatures, which typically we reserve for when we're doing our fancy dress and going to a nice dinner.
That's
like
right.
a mess dinner or something similar.
Formal dress, formal evening dress.
Which, yeah, some people might be surprised that, yeah, the uniforms you're seeing here aren't the most formal they get. It gets even more. And then if you're lucky enough to be in the Navy, you've got to do it all twice, in summer and winter gear. Complete change, you know, you're in whites for summer and in your black wool for winter. I practically always needed another bedroom just for Navy night.
Let's car with some of our nurses. Many of them did very difficult service, setting up field hospitals in places like Port Moresby. And the 2nd, 13th Australian General Hospital grew to 1,200 beds in the space of 6 weeks from a standing start.
Wow, that's incredible.
And it was full, so they had patients on stretchers underneath the beds as well.
Yeah, the tropical diseases caused far more casualties than battlefield wounding. 7th Division estimated that they had 200% casualties over the course of their campaign at Kokoda. In other words, every man was evacuated at least twice, if you can have that high percentage of casualties. But most of that is malaria, typhus, typhoid, dysentery, and
dysentery.
all that. Yeah, horrendous things. And the 2nd, 7th, one of the original Victorian units raised at the start of the war, probably most well known for Australian Indigenous man Reg Saunders, who becomes an officer later on in the war. He fought in North Africa, fought in Greece and Crete, and then fought back here in New Guinea. The unit was nearly destroyed. They were almost all captured on the beaches at Crete. The Navy was evacuating, Royal Navy and Royal Australian Navy were evacuating as many of the Australians, New Zealanders and English soldiers that they could from the beaches at Crete. But the 2nd, 7th is said to have lined up on the beach. And the Maoris on the ship sailing away sung the Maoris' lament, farewell, as they were being left. Almost the whole battalion marched into captivity.
Wow. There you can see there'll be very much getting into the Anzac Day spirit.
Missed the school, but bagpipes again. Fantastic.
The 2nd, 8th Infantry Battalions are the last of the 4 Victorian Infantry Battalions that were raised at the start of the war. So the 5th, 6th, 7th and 8th were the 4 original Victorian Infantry Battalions raised to be part of 6th Division. As you can see on their banner there, served in North Africa, Greece and Crete, and then fought again in New Guinea towards the end of the war. It's called the Itape-Wewak campaign of 1944 to 1945.
It's great to be seeing the families there, because I think it's important to remember what the families sacrifice. For every serviceman or woman, there's a family behind them supporting them.
And even if that person comes home safe and sound, you know, they've missed out on so much that's been going on at home.
Defence has a number of values, but I always say our first value is service. And whilst it's easy to recognise service with, you know, a uniform on, the service really does extend to the family who support the service people in their job.
and our Australian public servants supporting us as well. They do a sterling job, keeping the wheels ticking around in the background.
Absolutely. Full spectrum.
I was about to say, it really does take an army, doesn't it? Yeah, that's why we're here, Nate.
Well, that's why we put national in national defence, national
Exactly.
security. It is a nation effort.
On to the 7th Division. The silent 7th.
Oh, why silent 7th?
They tended to think that their exploits weren't as well regarded as some of the other divisions, but you know, they did a huge amount of fighting. So they fought in both in North Africa and against the Japanese. And we'll see some fine battalions and other units coming up from the 7th Division.
Salvation Army Band. The bands really do come from wide and far.
Brigade, who fought at Milne Bay, which was is important because it's recognised as the first time that the Japanese were comprehensively defeated.
Now, which among you has a memory of what this is, or what happened there at Milne Bay? Oh, Adrian's ready.
Yep. An amphibious landing to begin with, so late August 1942. It's happening almost concurrently with the Kokoda campaign. So it's down at the far end of New Guinea. And all three services serve there. Obviously 75 and 77 Squadron flying Kitty Hawks, P-40 Kitty Hawks, provide the aerial attack on the Japanese forces. And as James has just mentioned, the 18 Brigade, but also a couple of the militia units also fight there. And it's the first land defeat that the Japanese suffer. Obviously, they'd already been defeated at battles of the Coral Sea, strategically defeated anyway, and then obviously Midway, of course, most importantly in June 1942. But it really is, as James said, the first land defeat that the Japanese army suffers and Marines suffer.
We see so we've just had the 2nd 14th and we've got the 2nd 16th, both 21st Brigade battalions, both fought at Ishirava.
And the 2nd 27th, so the third of those three battalions. The first of them is Victorian, the 2nd 16th are Western Australians, and the 2nd 27th are South Australians. But yeah, all part of the F-21 Brigade, and as James has said, fight over the Kokoda track in August, September, October 1942.
The CO, the 2nd 27th, knew how to brew was Cooper. He knew how to brew a beer or two. Because that was the family business.
And the battalions coming through now, probably not as well known in Victoria. The 2nd 25th is a Queensland raised battalion. And the other two are unique, the 2nd 31st and the 2nd 33rd, because they're actually raised in the United Kingdom. There's sort of, at the start of the war, many Australian troops are sent to the Middle East, but also many others end up in England. And they have so many surplus troops that they raise 2 battalions in the United Kingdom. So those men come from all the different states and territories of Australia. We mentioned engineers before, but the pioneers Pioneers they're not quite fish nor fowl. They are trained to be and that's a bit mean. They're trained to fight as infantry, but they have additional skills, not to the level of engineers. So you couldn't go like today's combat engineers or sappers. They're not that, but they can do in the First and Second World Wars. Pioneer battalions existed to provide additional support to help. More minor engineering tasks, I guess, not the really complex tasks that James was mentioning earlier.
Yeah, that's awesome. So like infantry plus, essentially.
Yes, yeah. I mean, you have to fight, obviously, as an infantryman, but you can also be used in those engineering tasks.
Well, luckily, we've got somebody who has multi-skills as well. Leanne Wong's been chatting with more people down on the street.
It means remembering people who have fought for our country to have the freedom that we have today. And it's especially special to me because my great uncle won a Victoria Cross, so it's also remembering him and everyone else who served with him.
There are very few people who can say that.
101 Australians, to be exact.
Well, it depends on if they've got a brother or sister that then had a child who had, so you can have a great uncle.
True.
So here we see the 8th Division coming through. Probably they would be the least well recognised of the 4 divisions, given the fact that their war tragically ended very early for them. The 2 brigades went into captivity with the fall of Singapore. Which was, I think Churchill described it as one of the worst surrenders in the history of the British Empire.
And the 3rd of those brigades you can see coming through now, the members of the bird forces, as it were, gull, lark and sparrow forces. And 2 of those battalions are Victorian and the 3rd of them, 2nd 40th, is Tasmanian, all sadly captured, defending island bases, so New Britain, Timor and Ambon in sort of January, February, March 1942.
And tragically there we see the Montevideo Maru, so that's Australia's worst maritime disaster. It was had about 1,000 POWs, taking them to Japan, and it was torpedoed by a US submarine. But it's great to see those relatives out there remembering the service of the 8th Div.
Just getting a little bit of a helping hand there. That's what it's all about, right? Everybody supporting each other on a day like today.
There's another one of the field ambulances going by. They've got an incredibly difficult job, so they're providing initial casualty care to the wounded, and they're often doing that not far from the front line, so they'll often be either under artillery fire or taking or being shot at while they're trying to do that work.
When we're talking about a field ambulance, is that a couple of guys with a stretcher?
No, it's actually
a
forward. There'll be a casualty collection point, and also they'll be able to provide rudimentary emergency surgery.
For the Army in the First World War and the Second World War, your first line of medical care is called an RAP, so a regimental aid post. So you have your own stretcher bearers who remove, so your mates who are serving with you in your company, remove you in your regimental aid post. Then you come back to the field ambulance, back to a casualty clearing station if you're more severely wounded and can't be patched up and sent back, and then move back to one of the AGHs, which we've seen a few of, the Australian General Hospitals. So there's multiple levels of medical care. But as James has just said, frequently for regimental aid posts and the casualty clearing stations and the field ambulance, you are under fire.
Here we see the 9th Division, so they're a little bit unusual. Their unit patch is in the shape of a T, and that is in recognition for the Sterling work that they did at Tobruk. So the unit patch was actually changed after Tobruk.
So you see images of some men who have the original unit patch, which is from sort of late 39 into 1940 and 1941. But same as I said, they served at Tobruk from February, early March 1941 through till September, October 1941, the defence of that port, particularly a particularly important port in the Mediterranean on the Libyan coast. And yeah, after that, in recognition of their service, they changed to a T.
Yeah, of course, HMAS Tobruk was a ship as well. Like that what happened at Tobruk was so important for Australians. Yeah, I know. I never got to serve in Tobruk, but that's was one of the vessels that probably had more army people in it than navy people at times.
It's a little while ago. We saw the banner of the Scrapyard Flotilla, and they supplied Tobruk. That's the destroyers, the old and battered, often destroyers of the Royal Australian Navy and Royal Navy, doing supply runs under great threat from German and Italian dive bombers from sort of Cairo and Alexandria through to Tobruk and back again. The Australian Navy was critically important in supplying and keeping the Australian Army going in the port of Tobruk.
Yeah, the Scrap Iron Flotilla. Like we're pretty scrappy when we need to be, right? Get the job done, whatever it takes.
Yep.
Well, I think that name actually came from Lord Haw, one of the German propagandists.
And he tried to make it sound like it wasn't as good as it really was.
So he used it as an insult.
And we took it as a name of pride. Yeah.
Oh. Same with the rats of Tobruk.
Yeah.
Yep.
Said that they were the Australians were hiding in their holes like rats.
Yep.
In Tobruk, and adopted that as a badge of honour.
Badge of honour, absolutely.
You have to work doubly hard if you're trying to insult an Australian, I think.
So many of these battalions have got El Alamein as one of their battle honours. One of the most important battles that the Australians fought in the Second World War. So it was the start of the Montgomery, assuming the offensive in the Middle East. And the 9th Division took the brunt of the fighting. Montgomery pulled out his other divisions so that they could refit for the advance. And at one point, the 9th Division was fighting against the Deutsche Afrika Korps all by itself. But interestingly enough, Montgomery weighted the odds in their favour. At one point, the division had 13 regiments of artillery in support.
Wow.
And in 2nd El Alamein, they fired 1.5 million rounds in 13 days. That's a lot of artillery.
Yeah. And a division should have, at that time, 3 regiments. So one field artillery regiment supporting each of the 3 brigades. So it was an extraordinary weight of metal.
And when they were under attack, they would call in what was called a stonk, a standard concentration, and that was 72 guns firing at the same place.
Right. That's an incredible amount of
absolutely
metal going down range.
It is.
Think of the supply chain and the history.
Just trying to keep that fed.
Just the raw materials to make all of that. The speed.
Well, there was a huge deception plan for Operation Lightfoot, which was what the breakout was, and much of that was hiding all of that ammunition. Because those stockpiles would have certainly given it away.
And we can see how important or how many people were in support. We've got all the AASC, so the Australian Army Service Corps, and you've already mentioned the Ordnance Corps. So yeah, what the Americans would call the teeth to tail ratio, so the number of those actually serving in the front line in direct combat, is relatively small compared to the massive supply chain that comes behind to move those supplies forward, and obviously then move damaged vehicles rearwards or damaged humans rearward to be repaired.
And just moving those supplies, we've got a whole corps, our transport corps, responsible for moving the inordinate amount of supplies.
The Royal Australian Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, RAAF, who fix all those vehicles.
Yep.
Here we have the 3rd Division. So that started in 1916, and they've sort of expanded and contracted over the decades. Saw service in the World War I, World War II, was disbanded in 45, but then re-raised in 1948 as the Citizens Military Force, and was that sort of period from there through the Cold War, and then was disbanded in 1992. And indeed, I'm that old. My first posting was to the 3rd Division.
Wow.
Just before it was disbanded.
Yeah, because 89 you joined, you
yes.
said? Yeah. Just got in by the skin of your teeth.
Well, yeah, I'd done my officer training and then as a second lieutenant posted to the 3rd Division.
And they said, oh, actually, we won't bother with this one anymore. So it wasn't you. You weren't the reason they were disbanded.
No.
Okay, good.
But the last commanding general was General Luttrell, and he was the reviewing officer on my graduation parade.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, bit of history.
And in fact, the 4th Brigade was a part of the 3rd Division.
Yes.
During the Second World War.
And the 4th Brigade now is part of the 2nd Division, Army Reserve, and it comprises 6 units across Victoria and Tasmania.
Okay, so we forget the rules about left and right hand side of chest if the medals are bigger than your entire chest.
Yes.
Yeah, many of the militia battalions, not as well known, sadly, but served on New Britain and on Bougainville. So some pretty, at times, brutal campaigns in 1944 and 1945, trying to mop up, I guess, the last of the Japanese resistance in those islands. And obviously appalling conditions too in the tropics, as you mentioned before, the tropical diseases, but constant rain, constant high humidity, and really not as much support as particularly once the American advance had moved further north towards the Philippines. Particularly those militia units were almost in, not a backwater, but certainly not as high profile, but still fighting day after day after day for months on end.
Do you find that really interesting, the challenges that the tropics threw up, you know, because they hadn't had to deal with it before. And obviously, the tropics are still the tropics today. And that puts Australia in a pretty unique sort of position, isn't it? Because we extend from the tropical north of Darwin and the Territory all the way down to only just shy of subpolar regions down in Tasmania.
Yes.
I mean, we've got to have a bunch of skills just to be able to train here at home, let alone head overseas.
Yes, I always found it interesting that when we first raised commando units in 1940 and 41, they were training on Wilson's Prom for deployment to the Pacific. And eventually somebody decided that really the problem down there on Wilson's Prom that they were getting frostbite. Not something that was going to be much of an issue when they eventually deployed to New Guinea. So they did move them up to an extent, the Atherton Tablelands, but also Canungra, up in the Gold Coast sort of hinterland, to train there and have more appropriate weather conditions and jungle conditions.
And the ability to fight in jungle, that's one of the fundamental things that you need in lots of the island nations around our area. And that's something that Adrian can speak rather eloquently on, because that's what he did his PhD in. And it's a fascinating story, though, of how the Australian Army learnt to be able to fight in the jungle.
I was always interested, I guess, in trying to understand how the Australian Army fought in North Africa in the desert, but then transitioned in a very short space of time to fighting in the Pacific. And so, I wanted to look at that and try to understand how that came about.
Moving on to the 5th and 11th Divisions, and you see there the 22nd Infantry Battalion, the Descendants. So the battalion served in Gallipoli, France, Belgium. The first Victoria Cross was awarded in there, the 2nd Lieutenant Rusty Ruthven, and the 22nd was awarded 272 decorations. Their battle honours comprised Gallipoli, the Somme, Pozières, Mocha Farm, Passchendaele, Bullecourt and Montsequetin.
And there's a William Ruthven Secondary College in Reservoir, named after that BC recipient.
A railway station?
Yes.
The origins of the 8th 7th Battalion Royal Victoria Regiment stem from the 22nd Infantry Battalion.
Well, I think it's time us Army and Navy people brought in some Air Force with a fly past by the Royal Australian Air Force.
PC-21 pilots, 4 of them coming over in formation.
They're flying north to south along St Kilda Road, and then they're going to conduct a sweeping turn, and then they'll track back from the east to the west. Flying right over the Shrine of Remembrance. It is always very impressive to see pilots do that formation flying. I had the absolute pleasure of being with the RAAF roulettes out up in the air with the roulettes. They're the demonstration team, and they scared the living daylights out of me, being that close to each other with me in there. But that is some incredible skill.
That would have been a great experience, though.
Oh, it was. Had to wear special pants, life support pants that gave me a squeeze every time we went and pulled a few too many G's to keep the blood back in your head so you don't pass out. Never had to do a flight with life support before.
The G suit.
Yes, yeah. It was great fun. So those skills that they have, that's something that our military is really well known for. Like the flying formations, but also ships do much the same at sea, and we operate a lot closer than many navies around the world. The Americans wouldn't go anywhere near as close to each other as we do. Just for example.
Gippsland Light Horse.
What would the light horse's job have been?
So they were a cavalry capability in the First World War. So they would do reconnaissance, screening, so stopping the enemy from conducting their reconnaissance.
Think of eyes and ears for the commander.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they're quick and they can move.
Yeah. You tell them, I want to know about this, this and this, and they'd go out and search for it.
The Heavy ACAC Association, so these are the, they were using the artillery to shoot down aircraft. So keep, because there was a lot of Japanese aircraft, particularly in the early days of the campaign, and so anti-aircraft capability was essential.
Why ACAC?
That is a good question.
I see that and I think acknowledgement, right? Like that's normally you go ACK to say yes.
I think it may be one of the derivatives of the phonetic alphabet.
Yep, right.
A for ACK.
There you go. I knew I could just throw you one and you'd catch it.
Or Australians just love to abbreviate everything.
Yep, don't we?
Surprised it's not ending in O.
Yeah. A lot of these people will be wearing their original medals. I don't. though. I wear replicas, and I think that's probably what most modern military people tend to do. My originals, very secure and hidden away and never been touched by human hands. And never will be, hopefully. Just to keep them pristine.
Oh, I'm the same. You know, it's engraved with your name and your service number.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I wear replicas as well.
So the sappers have been coming through. Now we've got Usher's mob.
It really is a skill, being able to read music, translate that into playing stuff, and keep your feet going at the right speed and in time, as well as staying behind the person in front and you know, just shoulder to shoulder with the people next to you, doing all of that and not dropping a note.
And sound good at the same time. Yeah, there's a lot going on. I've got a lot of respect for them.
A shout out to our march marshals who have been guiding the people who are marching through these city streets. So they all line up in the north of the CBD there along Collins Street and Swanston Street and the laterals that come into Swanston Street. And as viewers have probably seen, there's some gaps and then there's bunching up and, you know, it's just like normal traffic.
Yeah.
It's a concertina effect. So, you know, thanks to all the marshals out there that are trying to control the march.
See the second, third docks operating company, and I think it's really interesting when you think about combat operations, you probably don't think about who's going to unload the stores off the ships, but someone needs to unload the stores off the ships, and it'd be the docks operating companies that would do that.
A couple maybe fighting with the banner there a little bit.
There's always that point where the ship or boat comes alongside and, you know, who's responsible? Is it the Army on the dock, the wharfies, or is it the Navy personnel on the ship?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you from a small boat perspective, when my very first time being on a mine hunter and we had to store or I think it was a store ship, I got told, if you want to eat, you're going to help. And that was it. That was it. So even the officers had to get involved, which I loved. Well, down on the street there, actually, speaking of the Navy, Leanne's managed to find herself a sailor.
So, Omkar, what does Anzac Day mean to you?
Anzac Day means a big meaning to me, actually. That coming here for service, being with other people, and definitely like for the fallen, being there. Yeah, definitely.
And has it felt marching today?
Really well, actually. I've been with some of the captain of the RAN, instructing us how to, you know, march and everything. It was a wonderful day, actually.
Tradition sort of thing? Yeah.
Descendants.
Oh, there we go. You can see a few of those gaps starting to open up that you were talking about there. Now, radar. That's something that really changed the game when it came to military operations, isn't it?
Absolutely. The ability to give that forewarning to the fighter squadron so that they could get off the ground, get some altitude, so that they would then have the advantage. So the radar operation, and that was that capability came in I want to say around 1942.
From my perspective, it's something that's really interesting because, of course, we use radar for navigation and for warfare at sea, and also in meteorology, but we tune it exactly opposite. You know, back when I was in the military, you're trying to get rid of all of the little reflections to try and see the big stuff nice and clearly. When it comes to weather, I want to see the little ones because that's the raindrops. you know, so to change my mind about how to use a radar over my career.
And we're talking about the Navy, and now moving on to flying boats, so aircraft that land on the water. Sunderland squadrons. The very first operations flown by Australians in the Second World War was a number 10 squadron was over converting in England to their Sunderlands. They just arrived there to pick them up and were supposed to be bringing them back to Australia. But the Second World War broke out, and our Prime Minister at the time, Robert Menzies, said to the British they can stay there. And so that squadron flew out the rest of its war service, the whole of the war, in the United Kingdom. So flying operations mostly looking for German submarines and obviously protecting our convoys and our naval vessels.
It's that kind of thing that informs why we still exercise internationally today, right? That you hear people talking about it maybe in press conferences and stuff, but interoperability, it's absolutely vital, right?
Yep. The banner that we just saw there was 460 Squadron. Probably the most well-known Lancaster bomber squadron of the Second World War, I would argue. And if you've ever been to the Australian War Memorial in Canberra, you can see that Lancaster that is on display there was from 460 Squadron. And sadly and horrifically, 460 RAAF Squadron suffered the most casualties of any RAAF Bomber Command squadron in the Second World War. It also dropped the greatest tonnage of bombs, but it had more than 1,000 men killed in action during the Second World War.
Incredible sacrifice, incredible bravery for those aircrew to night after night get back into the plane.
Yep, and young men, the majority of them enlisting between 18 and 22, and there's people who are even squadron leaders at the ages of 19, 20, 21, because the attrition rate is so appalling. You have to complete 30 night bombing raids on occupied Europe, and the loss rate averaged across the Second World War is 4% on each mission, but 4 times 30. Statistically, you cannot complete a tour of operations, and many crews do not. Obviously, it's very rare. I mean, but then again, some of them complete 2 or 3 tours of operations. If anybody, people know the Dam Busters, Guy Gibson, I think, flies 138 operations, so equivalent to 5 tours before he is killed.
Interesting, the huge mobilisation for the RAAF, because at the start of the war, the RAAF described themselves as without 2 feathers to fly with, and by the end of the war, we had the 6th largest air force in the world.
That's incredible.
It is, isn't it? Oh, you wouldn't have thought it, but
no, not at all. Just, you know, for especially then, such a small nation.
Yep, 220,000 Australians serve in the RAAF in the Second World War by the end of it. It's a massive formation.
We just saw a cargo pass there, and the sign in there was odd bods.
Ah,
yes.
They're interesting.
Yes, so they were Australian aviators who actually served in other squadrons, such as the RAF.
One of my great uncles served with 227 Squadron, which is an RAF squadron, so a British squadron, flying operations in Beaufighters over the Middle East and North Africa, and then the Italian campaign. And so he was a member of the Royal Australian Air Force, so he wore that colour naval blue uniform, but he was in an RAF, so a British squadron, so served with Brits and Canadians and other Australians. So many thousands of Australians were in the same boat, and at the end of the war, they wanted to be able to, I guess, continue to talk to people who had like experiences. They couldn't just go and talk to the 460 Squadron there before, or the 77 Squadron, the Kitty Hawks. So they formed the odd bods, because that's how they regarded themselves. They're a bit odd or separate.
And many of those would have gone through the Empire Air Training Scheme, which was an incredibly successful scheme, and trained thousands and tens of thousands of pilots.
Yep.
For the RAF.
it's the scales of the numbers that always get me. You know, the tens of thousands there, or the hundreds of actions, and it's just something so far away from us today. It's so luckily, you know, definitely, but it's such an important thing to remember.
11 divisions in the Australian Army.
In Waverley Secondary College here. Oh, now that's the one I want.
The electric...
yeah, piano, absolutely. Is it a keytar? No. Some non-traditional instruments there. I'm liking that a lot.
Yeah, and once the Japanese enter the Second World War, the RAAF becomes extraordinarily stretched. I mean, at the start of the war, we could send all of our crews that we trained over to the United Kingdom to fly operations either over occupied Europe or in the Middle East. But once you get to obviously December the 7th, 1941, we need many squadrons to be operating in Australia. And we raised dozens and dozens of squadrons. Army Air Cooperation squadrons flying things like the Boomerang and Wirraway, but more than a dozen squadrons flying Beauforts, the twin-engine bombers, and a ground attack, a massive increase in that Air Force that is necessary to provide protection to our Navy in the Pacific Theatre, but also our Army, obviously, fighting on land.
Looks like we're coming up to World War I descendants, and you can see a number of banners there. Like I mentioned, there is a number of metropolitan primary schools that are adopting a World War I unit to preserve their history and make sure that it's documented and it lives on.
Yeah, we had two services. I work for the Shrine of Remembrance, so we had two services here yesterday that were accompanied by primary schools, and the children laid wreaths. In one of the services, each of the 36 students had written a reflection. So each of them came forward and wrote and recited their one paragraph reflection. And it helps those associations, I guess, to gives a bit of life to them, to have students showing an interest. So yeah, there's sort of like an adopt an X organisations.
And that flows on to the Premier's Spirit of Anzac Prize, which is open to Year 9 to 12 students, and they write, or they do a video, or they do some artwork or poetry or music, whatever, but what does the Anzac spirit mean to you? And it's how they interpret it, and it is wide and vast as to what they think of the Anzac spirit. It's amazing. Of course, the prize is a battlefields tour for 2 weeks over in Turkey and France and Belgium.
I've been to Villers-Bretonneux in France, but I haven't been to Turkey, and that's on my bucket list.
Yep,
for sure.
Yes,
it's a must.
Dawn Service 1998 was when I did that. So it's many years ago now, but yeah, it's an incredible experience if you can go at some stage. And the Turks are incredibly welcoming for some people who are ex-adversaries, incredibly welcoming for Australians and New Zealanders.
Actually, I found the same in Villers-Bretonneux. There were Australian flags flying all across the little village.
There's a primary school, isn't there, in Villers-Bretonneux, and
yes,
in their hall it says thank you to the Australians.
Yeah, nous oubliez Australie. Never forget Australia.
Well, St Matilda again.
So yeah, the units that are coming through now are First World War, so obviously there's no veterans left alive who served in that conflict. So they now come through, those associations, if they still exist, or the family members come through at the end, towards the conclusion of the Anzac Day March.
Given the amount of people that served in the First World War, I'd say a lot of people have relatives that did serve or contributed to the service, because of course the men did go away, and a lot of the women worked here in Australia to support the war effort. And I know my grandmothers, they were promoted and became managers and did jobs that were traditionally male jobs. So it was a full national effort.
Yeah, it really changed the outlook for women, number one, and in terms of employment, but then also when the men came back, figuring out that we needed to look after our veterans was something that really started because of these conflicts. It maybe took some time to really take hold, but these days, you know, the DVA, for example, is really looking after people as best it can, and encouraging veterans when they get back to Australia to stay connected and seek support where they need it, and encouraging people as well to consider employing veterans. It turns out we're a pretty good mob.
The origins in this precinct, whilst we've got the shrine and we've spoken about that, this whole St Kilda Road precinct is steeped in veteran architecture and use. So the Victorian College of the Arts, the origin was was a general hospital. We've got Victoria Barracks across the road.
Just across the street.
Yes, and certainly 312 St Kilda Road was the original repatriation, I guess triage you could call it, for veterans. So it was a whole precinct, which was great. And now we charities like the Australian National Veterans Art Museum, you know, that's a cultural institution, it's veteran-led charity, and enhances and strengthens well-being in that I got Victoria on the brain, veteran community. So, you know, art programs, projects, collaborations, those sort of things really bring veterans together.
Yeah, and VAM is great. And now, of course, down the other end of the precinct, Anzac Station.
Yes.
Really tying it all together.
Yes.
Not very many things get to use the name Anzac. It's very tightly controlled.
I do recommend people doing a veterans art trail.
Yes, for sure.
Anne Van puts that on, and so much architecture, buildings, and history of veterans helping. Now, whether that's in an engineering space or public purpose, and even small things like some of the St Paul's Cathedral gargoyles were crafted by veterans.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, it's just extraordinary to see the extent across our fine city.
Of course, art and war have always gone hand in hand, and Australia has often sent either photographers or artists to go and capture what's been happening, when we're deployed overseas, and that's led to some of the most iconic Australian art from modern times, from last century.
You've got the galleries of remembrance underneath the shrine here, where it's open to the public, and you can go there and see some of the art. There's some permanent installations, but then there's some features that come. And when Adrian's back, he'll be able to tell us all about what's on show at the moment.
Actually, a little bit of a self-plug, why not? I did a documentary called The Art of Remembrance that you'll probably see on the ABC through the day today, or of course on iView. You can always find it there. It takes a look at Australia's story with war and conflict overseas through the lenses or the paintbrushes of those artists in particular.
We can see the banner there from the Boer War, and what people probably won't know, that 23,000 Australians served in the Boer War in South Africa, whether it was in state, Australian, imperial or colonial contingents, with 1,000 of them paying the ultimate sacrifice. So you can see the names on the banners there. Victorians were involved in Mafeking, Kimberley, Elands River, Cape Colony, Rhodesia, Munster, Cop, Pink Hill, Transvaal, Obanwatch, Costa River, and I can't pronounce the other ones. But, quite extensive to think that was over that Federation period. So, some went over as a part of the state colonial force, and then the first Australian contingents post-Federation.
In the Boer War, you can already see that sort of the Australian spirit sort of coming through. At Elands River, Colonel Charles Hall was approached by the Boers, who asked him to surrender. And he said, "Even if I wished, and I don't, I am commanding Australians who would cut my throat if I accepted your terms."
Meanwhile, Leanne's been on the street having a chat with some of the parade participants.
So Freya, how much does it mean to you to take part in today's march?
Yeah, it's really important, just like getting everyone involved in the march, and it's really good also with the school showing their support for all the Anzacs, and it's really enjoyable to go knowing that we're helping them continue to keep their memories alive.
And what does Anzac Day mean to you?
It's really important, just knowing that there were people that fought for our country and really were out there trying to support us all, even before we were born. So it's really awesome just knowing that there were people there fighting for us.
Well, there you go. See, Anzac Day has meaning for essentially everybody, even if what you're doing is supporting the veterans. If you aren't personally connected, you can still feel a part of Anzac Day.
Absolutely. It's great to see the community sort of coming together. There's a good crowd today and a great crowd this morning.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, huge, 50,000. Tell you what though, I'm just looking at the flags at half-mast outside where we're sitting. The wind's starting to pick up a little bit. That front that's been threatening us is approaching, but you know what? I think we might just get away with it.
It's been fantastic up until now.
Yep. I reckon I can hold it for just a little bit longer. I'll hold the weather off, don't you worry about it.
See, it's wonderful to see so many different organisations from around the world, many of whom Australians have served alongside in different campaigns. The Gurkhas, obviously, as it said on their banner, since 1816, but Australians served alongside them in Konfrontasi, so on the island of Borneo, known to the Indonesians as Kalimantan, so in 1964, 65 and 66. There were a couple of Gurkha battalions deployed alongside other British units, and obviously also Australians who deployed there in that period. SASR, I think as James mentioned earlier, this Special Air Service Regiment, but also the 4th Battalion deployed in 66.
And I think this part of the march is always very interesting, just to see the number of countries that Australia has fought beside.
We've traditionally had quite a national feeling of wanting to be able to help whenever we can, right?
Absolutely. And just the fact that 30,000 signed up to go to the Boer War. It's a huge number from such a small country.
Yep. My great-grandfather was in the 5th Victorian Mounted Rifles.
Really?
So 5th contingent of the Victorian Mounted Rifles. So George Threlfall, back there in 1900, one of those who went.
You have a very strong family connection.
Yes, 5 generations have served in the Defence Force, in the Australian Army. We don't talk about the one who served in cavalry. That's a bit mean. My father's cousin served in 3 Cav, so the 3rd Cavalry Regiment in the Vietnam War in 1970, so driving APCs, the M113 carriers.
South Africans, the Rhodesians. Of course, Australians fought, the 9th Division fought next to a South African division at 2nd El Alamein.
The Indians that we saw earlier, I mean, the Indian Army in the Second World War is the largest volunteer army in history. 2.4 million men enlisted and obviously fought alongside Australians and Kiwis and British and South Africans in the Middle East, in North Africa, and also in the Burma campaign.
Meanwhile, Leanne Wong's been down on the street. She's speaking with the state president of the RSL.
Hello again. I'm here with Robert Webster, who's the RSL state president. Robert, you're retiring from your role as state president this year. Do you want to take us through some of your memories of these Anzac Day commemorations over the past few years?
The last few years, of course, we had COVID and that knocked us around with all of the things. One year we couldn't even run it. And, we couldn't even do the footy at the MCG. And we did the ode and the bugle calls on an empty MCG. But the march has always been an important part. Anzac Day is a tremendously important part of Victoria. And, as I was saying earlier, I can remember probably 1954 was the first one. My brother David was about 9 months old. And we met down at the Floral Clock waiting for Dad and his mates who served during the Navy. Mum saw some of her mates who she'd served with in the Women's Army service during the war. So it's ingrained. It's part of it. And then it was very special for a long time marching with my brother as a Vietnam veteran as well. And he called it quits on us during COVID, unfortunately. But it's a fabulous day, and the respect that's shown to the veterans by the crowd, the people who are at the march, it's just astounding that people had called out to me as I walked along. Some of my former students yelled at me as I walked past, and they're tremendous memories that we'll always hold. Will I do it again next year? Probably, but not as the state president.
So what does next year's Anzac Day commemorations look like to you?
Well, it might be here, or it might be with my sister and her family in South Australia. They're involved in the local RSL and dawn services and stuff. It could be anything, and it might be in Canberra. It depends, but I'll be here doing something. The new state president, whoever it is, will maybe have a task for me, and that's fine. And I'm not going anywhere from a point of view. I will still be part of the RSL and still be available to speak and do whatever people want me to do to make things go, make things work.
Well, thank you so much, Robert, for your role as RSL state president.
Thank you. It's absolutely my pleasure. My pleasure.
And congratulations and thanks to you for your service, Mr. Robert Webster. Such a big job being involved with the RSL because there are so many veterans, and it's so great to be able to help veterans stay connected to community. And it doesn't matter. What he was saying was right. It doesn't matter where he ends up, because you can't take the Anzac Day out of the veteran. It's going to be with you no matter where you are. You're going to find something to do to mark the day.
I'll be at the footy.
You will?
At the G, and I always run into somebody that I haven't seen for years. And It's just such a great day to catch up with fellow veterans.
last banner was talking about the Indians who fought at Gallipoli, and there was Indian artillery that was providing fire support to Australian troops in the trenches. So that's a relationship that goes back 110 years.
It is really incredible how those actions, forged relationships that can persist for that long. Maybe not, 100% only as a result of that, but it opens a doorway. It opens a hand of friendship that can then, grow and become stronger over the decades and century.
Exactly. Well, we see the Americans here. The first time we fought with the Americans was on the 4th of July in 1918 at the Battle of Hamel.
There you go.
There's the Caulfield South Primary School yet again.
Hello, welcome back, Caulfield South. Still going, and still going very well.
They've put in a big day, haven't they?
This is hours of drumming now. Vietnam.
And it's interesting talking to some of the veterans of the South Vietnamese Army. They are incredibly appreciative of the support that Australia provided to them during the war and then after, for those who came out as refugees.
Yeah. This coming week marking 50 years since reunification of Vietnam.
Changed what Australia looks like. I mean, I taught for many, many years at Victoria University in the Footscray Park campus as a history lecturer, and obviously Footscray, one of the centres of where Vietnamese people settled after in the 1970s and 80s. In areas of Sydney like Cabramatta, so there's big pockets of that diaspora, that Vietnamese diaspora, changed by that conflict, changed the landscape of Australia.
They brought so much with them, including incredible food. Gosh, I love Vietnamese.
Ridiculously good food.
Oh.
I think this is one of the great aspects of Anzac Day, just being able to bring all of these people from all of these different walks of life, all these different backgrounds. Everyone comes together.
Yeah, come to the march, retire maybe for a beverage in the afternoon, or at least an Anzac bicky. I love it.
Yep.
I remember years ago I had a Vietnamese veteran of those conflicts come and talk to my students at VU, and he had been in the military and had been in combat for 23 years, which put into perspective, obviously, some Australians I know, some of the members of the Australian Army training team serve 3 tours, many serve 2 tours, and many regulars also serve 2 tours if their battalion deployed twice, which many of them did, obviously. But to hear that he'd been fighting in combat operations for 23 years of his life, he was in his 40s at that stage. It was just basically all his adult life he'd been in combat for the Army of the Republic of Vietnam.
That really is just mind-blowing. I mean, I've deployed. That was 6 months, and then I was home. That was it. Michelle, you did
8 months.
8 months. Yeah. Compare that to 23 years.
Yeah, because this gentleman was old enough to have fought in what they called the French War, so the 1945 to 1954, when the French were then defeated, obviously, at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. But then he'd also seen combat throughout the late 50s, throughout the 60s, and throughout the early 1970s. I found that extraordinary. But he was very grateful to Australia. He'd settled in Australia and he had a good life. He raised his family here. He was obviously in his 60s at that stage. He was happy that he had found, obviously disappointed, obviously, I'm sure, not to still be living in Vietnam, but very happy to have found Australia to welcome him.
Yeah, somewhere safe and welcoming.
And how great is this to see the Turks marching, representing their country and their new country, on a day when we think of the landing at Gallipoli.
Yeah. And it was once upon a time, us versus them. Now we can walk together.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and in the Korean War, Australians served alongside the Turks. Just before the Battle of Kapyong, so one of the largest battles that the Australians fought, the 23rd and 24th of April 1951, so yesterday and the day before. The Australian battalion commander, 3RA commander, was organising with the Turkish battalion that was sort of co-located to have an Anzac Day service together with the Kiwi artillery battalion, so regiment. So the three of them, Australians, New Zealanders and Turks, were all going to have an Anzac Day service. But the Chinese offensive put paid to that. Other matters intervened.
Right. I do just want to let everyone know that Adrian is sitting here, not a single note in front of him. Everything you're hearing is coming off the top of his head. You are incredibly impressive.
I'm in awe. Absolute awe. It's incredible.
I love military history.
Yeah. I guess it's the same as, like, if you want to look out the window and ask me about a cloud, you'd have to stop me from talking for hours.
Well, it's lovely to see so many nations represented here. When I was in Afghanistan, there were 48 nations that contributed to that mission in 2014. And so, yeah, I served with Turks and Greeks and Italians, Gurkhas, Macedonians, Romanians, lots of nations.
And I just saw the Polish banner go through there, and one of my great uncles was a Polish migrant. He'd fought at the Battle of Monte Cassino, so one of the most horrendous battles that the Allied forces fought in the Second World War, sort of from February to June 1944. And only occasionally did he mention what he'd done. He migrated to Australia after the war, and I think that experience affected him for the rest of his life, obviously, how could it not? But again, he's another one of those people who was very happy that he'd been welcomed into Australia, even though he, to his deathbed, he had a very thick accent, and half the time I couldn't understand what Henrik was saying to me, particularly when he got excited. But yeah, it was that Polish community, and those Polish soldiers fought incredibly bravely throughout the Second World War.
Of course, it's the international connection that Australia holds so proudly, right? Our cultural melange, our melting pot that makes us such a unique country. And it's great to see that, you know, we haven't only done that with our citizenry, but also with our reaching out across the oceans to neighbours and friends around the globe.
Here we've got the Serbian contingent. Over 1,500 Australians and New Zealanders served in Serbia or with Serbs in the First World War.
Now that would have been a bit of a shock to the system, I assume.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a little-known front, the Salonika front, sort of in northern Greece and across into Serbia, but it's some pretty brutal fighting. And even Australian nurses, a small contingent of them, but Australian nurses were deployed there too, in 1915 and 1916.
The cadet contingent, so we've got Army cadets, and we should have some Air Force after that.
And they've done fantastic work today.
Absolutely.
Carrying all those banners.
Or volunteering their time, of course.
Yes.
So it'll be a mix of Australian Defence Force cadets, so Army, Navy, Air Force. There'll be girl guides there, scouts, and they're all volunteers. And because they are all children, of course their parents have dropped them off. So we thank the parents as well for supporting their service as well.
Getting a little bit out of time there. Never mind.
Happens to everybody.
I may have square gated on occasion.
Okay, for those who don't know, square gating is where the arm that you put up is the same side as the leg you put up. And it makes you walk, well...
wonky.
Very wonky. That's the polite way of saying it.
It's not a natural walk.
No, but for some people, it seems to be natural when you're trying to march in time. Some people just can't help themselves.
I think the nerves take on, yes. So here's the Scouts and the Girl Guides. So you would have seen them around the, we're near spectators and, supporting the marshals, that sort of thing. So I guess what we don't see on camera here is back in the CBD grid and the coordination that is needed to get all these units and associations off marching at the right time and in the right order. And what we've seen today is a few haven't been in order and have thrown our commentary scripts, but those marshals and all the support crew in the CBD, they just do a fantastic job. Yeah. And sometimes they have to be very diplomatic. Because all the associations and units, they need to register to be in the march, and on the occasion, very odd occasion, some forget.
Right.
And they turn up.
And you still want to let everybody march,
right? Of course. But, that is a principle of war, isn't it? Flexibility.
That's it.
But
and a little bit of surprise.
Yes. But it's good to see so many people in the march today and the spectators there.
And I think the bands today have outdone themselves.
They really have. Especially those we've seen more than once.
And we span primary schools, secondary schools, Salvation Army, local council. And here are the March Marshals, headed by Lieutenant Colonel Murray Duckworth. And those marshals, like I said, have been in the CBD coordinating all the march, the associations, making sure they step off at the right time, the right place, in the right order, as much as they can. So thank you for your coordination, people.
Not as big a group as you would have thought. You would have needed to herd all of those groups who've seen march ahead of them.
Efficient,
yeah.
I think you would say.
Highly skilled and...
But there's a lot of other volunteers, like the cadets and the scouts and the guides, that do more, I guess, of the administrative elements. Doesn't that look great?
It looks amazing. You can see the skies are just starting to grey over, and I did say I thought I'd be able to hold it off until the end of the parade. Well, I think I've just about done as I promised. I think we're going to see some wet weather coming soon. We are nearing the end of the parade. And so I thought, well, as is customary on Anzac Day, the Governor-General of Australia gives a message. So I thought we might hear from Her Excellency, the Honourable Ms Sam Mostyn, AC, now.
For Anzac Day this year, I have joined the thousands of Australians and New Zealanders gathered at Anzac Cove to commemorate the 110th anniversary of the Gallipoli landings. There, I will honour the Anzacs and remember the ultimate sacrifice of those who were left behind. And as a symbol of the enduring bond between Australia and the sacred soil of Gallipoli, the wreaths that I will lay there will be woven through with this rosemary, which is taken from the Bravery Garden at Government House in Canberra, a garden inspired by the visit of my predecessor, Sir William Dean, to Gallipoli. Today in Australia, as dawn broke all across the country, over the dome of the Australian War Memorial's Hall of Memory in Canberra, above Anzac Grove at Gundagai, the birthplace of our most recent Victoria Cross recipient, the late Private Richard Norden, over the powerful HMAS Sydney II Memorial at Geraldton, and in cities and towns on the coast and in the bush across the nation, Australians, in all of our rich diversity, have commemorated together because of their own service or the service of family and friends, or simply through a sense of deep gratitude for sacrifices past and the dedicated work of our modern Australian Defence Force. Now, in my childhood, Anzac Day was a time of early wakings and dark, chilly starts for dawn services, of quietly watching as a family as my father marched with the Royal Australian Corps of Signals. In 2025, in the children and young people who reflect in the dawn light, lay wreaths and respect and march in honour, we can see this day of commemoration as an enduring experience of remembrance and renewal. In the words of one young Australian, commemoration can inspire Australia's potential to be brave and extraordinary. In Albany last year, looking out from the National Anzac Centre to King George Sound, where the first ships destined for the Middle East, Anzac Cove and the trenches of Gallipoli massed, I reflected on the power of that potential. I am recording this message in Townsville, where I acknowledge the traditional owners and pay my respects to their elders past and present. And like Governors General before me, I honour the Indigenous Australians who have served and sacrificed in defence of Australia. Here at Townsville Anzac Memorial Park, the ceremonies will speak of war waged on distant shores, but they will remember also when the Second World War came to Townsville, when ships filled the harbour and concrete forts gazed out over the ocean. Airstrips scarred the bush and radar stations stood sentinel on the hills around town. And in July 1942, when 3 raids by Japanese military flying boats brought the terror of aerial bombardment to the people of this region. They will celebrate the courage of the Australian personnel who fought then and in conflict since, and who served to uphold peace, preserve the rule of law, and defend our border on land, at sea and in the sky. And honour the threads of this history which endure in today's Australian Defence Force, a modern force upholding the greatest of Australian values, continuing the legacy of service of generations past and demonstrating the very best of our nation. Their dedication to duty and the defence of Australia, and their remarkable history of international peacekeeping, the operations in which they have served every year from 1947 until today. On my first Anzac Day as your Governor-General and Commander-in-Chief, it is a privilege to be part of the mosaic of commemoration unfolding across Australia and on sacred ground overseas. To have reflected with love and longing on the fallen, to have paid tribute to our veterans and their families who travelled the path of service alongside them, and to honour our service women and men of Australia as they uphold the mighty cause of peace. On behalf of all Australians, I will remember, lest we forget.
Wow, what a lovely first message from the Governor-General of Australia, Her Excellency, the Honourable Ms Sam Mostyn AC there. Now you can see, well, we are certainly coming to an end of the parade, but that doesn't mean, of the march, but that doesn't mean that it's all over by any means. We're going to be treated to some more bands, more marching. The crowds are really starting to gather now from further down the street along St Kilda Road, up here at the memorial for the next part of the service here on Anzac Day. It is a big day, plenty going on right throughout this morning, of course, but that extends into the afternoon. We've been really enjoying being with you for this time so far. I have lost one of my expert commentators though, Brigadier Michelle Campbell, went out to try to track down Leanne Wong.
Well, I'm here with another member of our expert commentary team, Brigadier Michelle Campbell. Now, Michelle, last 2 years you were actually marching. This year you're back in the commentary box. How does it feel?
Oh, it's great. Great to be back. It's a good team there, and it's really encouraging to see so many people out and about today. And the weather's held out. Fingers crossed.
And what does Anzac Day mean to you personally?
Oh, Anzac Day personally. For me, it's about three things, or three phases. The military like three phases. It starts with the dawn service, so that's our opportunity to pause and reflect the service and sacrifice that's gone before us in generations. Then it moves on to now the march, and what we've seen today has just been fantastic. So that's all about honouring the present and the current and former serving members. So it's all about the present. And then the final phase is this afternoon. I like to go to the football. It doesn't really matter what code of sport that you go to, but that's all about the future, because you're watching young people play some good sport. You're interacting with all generations, and it gives you hope for the future. So for me, that's it. Three phases.
No games of two up later on in the afternoon?
Oh, there might be a couple of those.
Thank you so much for chatting with us, Michelle. All the best for the rest of the day.
There you go. That's the face you've been hearing for the last few hours. James, I'm glad I didn't lose you too.
No, I'm still here.
And Adrian, but we're all pretty enough for the commentary team, huh? We're not the on-camera talent.
Face for radio.
I've always been told I've got a great head for radio.
That's not true.
That's us, mate.
Michelle's back in here now. Michelle, that was really lovely.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for tracking down Leanne. She's been running all around this place, finding...
She did a great job.
She has, hasn't she?
And she's got a really great disposition to, elicit some of those really heartfelt messages.
Yeah. She's been speaking with veterans and parade participants, just people of all walks of life, including people who just came along to have a look and watch the parade this morning. You can see now the commemoration ceremony is starting to get underway. We've still got a lot of pomp and ceremony from this point on. What will people expect down here at the shrine from here?
Well, we're just finishing the mass bands, the mass pipes. So that is all the pipes together, led by Warren Cole Hugh Smith.
And pipe major, I think, is Ben Casey from 5/6 Pipes and Drums. Left a picture screen.
And what's happening with the official party now? Are they departing?
Well, as things continue here at the Shrine of Remembrance, James, how's your 2025 Anzac Day been? How was this parade for you?
I think it's fantastic. I think so. I went to the battery service this morning in St Kilda, and 50,000 people here, fantastic, and just so many diverse people marching. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah. Adrian, thank you so much for joining us for the first time this year. How's it been being on the mic?
It's been a wonderful experience. Thank you for having me.
Oh, of course.
I've really enjoyed it.
We'll definitely have that brain back next year, that's for sure. And Michelle, getting back into stride after a couple of years off?
Yeah.
Does it feel like getting on a bike again?
It's fantastic. Yeah.
Excellent. And how has this Anzac Day compared for you?
Well, I was in command last year, commander of 4th Brigade. So this year, after a bit of decompression, I feel a little bit more relaxed.
That's lovely. Well, I think this was a wonderful Anzac Day. Really, just Melbourne at its best, commemorating the people who have served in the past and the people who are serving now too. Thank you so much for watching this 2025 broadcast of the Melbourne Anzac Day March. This is the end of the coverage for us, but if you missed any of this or the dawn service this morning, you can see those on our website and streaming platforms. They'll also be available there later today and on ABC iView. And later you can watch live coverage of the Gallipoli dawn service from Turkey, followed by the commemorative service from Villers-Bretonneux in France. And many thanks to our expert commentators, Michelle, James and Adrian, along with the rest of the incredible behind-the-scenes ABC team. Hey, I'm Nate Byrne. I really look forward to holding off this weather just a little bit longer and then joining you next year for another March service.